Hey there, welcome back to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, settle in for 4 hours of spine-chilling horror stories set against the soothing backdrop of rain and soft thunder. These unsettling tales will send a shiver down your spine while easing you into a calm, restful night. If the stories give you the creeps, show some love with a like, and share where you're listening from in the comments. Now, get comfy, turn the lights down low, and let's dive into the darkness. If you're in bed at night and hear someone whistling, hide immediately. Last night was by far the most terrifying night I've ever experienced in my life. I'm honestly surprised I'm here right now. If I hadn't listened to my instincts, I would most definitely have faced a gruesome death. So please, take my advice and hide if you hear someone whistling in the middle of the night. Last night, I was super excited as this was the first 2-day weekend I had in over 2 months. My big plans were to buy tons of snacks, set my recliner up to be my own little paradise, and binge watch some Netflix. I know, boring, but hey, I'm 30 years old, and I've been done with the party lifestyle for a while now. Anyways, after probably 5 hours straight of shoveling candy down my throat and watching my favorite shows, I decided it was time to get some sleep. It was about 2 a.m. and way later than I've stayed up in months. After cleaning my mess up and shutting the TV off, I brushed my teeth and climbed into bed. After 15 minutes or so, I felt my eyes getting really heavy, and I was in that stage of being awake and asleep. That's when I heard it. A faint whistling. My ears perked up, and I listened closely. It sounded like it was coming from my neighbor's complex. We have very thin walls in our apartment, so it's not unusual to hear him at times, but never at 2 in the morning. The whistle was to the tune of Silent Night. The whistle made its way from my neighbor's to out in the hallway that separated our doors. A feeling of dread washed over me, and somehow, I knew I needed to hide. I got up as quickly and quietly as I could and ran into my closet, closing the door just a crack so whoever was outside my door wouldn't hear the click of the door shutting. Benny? It sounded like my neighbor, only his voice was somehow off. What I heard next made my heart pound in my chest. My deadbolt unlocked somehow. There was no way he could have unlocked it, not from outside the door. I began to sweat and was struggling to keep my breathing under control as the most intense fear I've ever felt took over my body. I'm coming. Benny. His voice changing pitch at the wrong times. My door slowly creaked open. I heard a soft dragging sound, followed by a heavy thud with each step he took. I could hear his ragged breathing as he neared closer. Then he started whistling again, the same tune as before, only now louder. I was fighting tears as he slowly crept closer and closer to my bedroom. I prayed to God to make this thing go away as I slammed my eyes shut. I knew this thing wasn't my neighbor, or even human for that matter. Everything about it felt off. It stopped just outside my bedroom door and didn't make a sound. From where I was in the closet, I could see the entrance to my bedroom door. I wish I had never opened my eyes back up, but of course, I did. At the very top left corner, I saw a deformed head poking around the corner. The top of my door frame was at least 6.5 feet tall, and this thing was hunched over. It was huge. I couldn't make out any details of its face because my lights were off. The only lighting came from the streetlights shining through my bedroom window. I'm actually glad I couldn't see its face because I probably would have fainted out of fear. Benny. It whispered. I squeezed my eyes shut yet again as I heard it enter my room. I could smell it now, and it stunk horribly of rotted death. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I thought for sure I was gonna die. I could hear it yank the blankets off my bed as it searched for me, letting out a grunt of confusion when it realized I wasn't there. It sat still, panting heavily, as it must have been figuring out what to do next. Then it started slowly making its way out of my room, once again whistling. Once I heard my front door shut, I finally breathed out a sigh of relief, not realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. I listened for a few minutes before leaving the closet, and as I sat there, I heard another door from across the hall open. "What the?" my other neighbor Tommy shouted after a few minutes. His voice was cut off before he could finish his sentence, and I heard a couple of loud thuds, followed by silence. I ended up staying in my closet the whole night and woke up about an hour ago. There were police everywhere in our apartment complex, as someone must have found Tommy. I haven't been questioned yet, but I'm sure I will be. I can't tell them the truth. They'll think I'm a psycho and possibly suspect me of killing Tommy. I'm going to lie and tell them I was asleep and act like I have no idea what's going on. If anyone has any clue what this thing is and what I can do to make sure it doesn't come back, I'd really appreciate it. I have a feeling it will be back tonight, and I'm completely terrified. I, 33M, live in Texas with my daughter, Alicia, 8F, and my son, Jay, 4M. Their mom has been out of the picture for the past 2 years, not dead, just a terrible person, and I've managed pretty well as a single father. The three of us live in a 2-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood. I've got a solid job, and the kids are thankfully healthy. Everything was smooth sailing until one night, 2 months ago, when I was awakened by Jay poking me in the face. He was sobbing violently, though I recognized it as the I'm afraid kind of crying as opposed to the I'm hurt kind of crying, which made me a little less worried. Jay's always been nightmare prone, so I assumed that was what was causing him distress. When I asked him what was wrong, though, he said, "The man in the next house is making scary faces at me." I'd heard my fair share of Jay's stories about monsters terrorizing him from the dark corners of his bedroom, but this was something new. I assumed he meant our neighbor's house, and the lack of fantastical elements in his description made me uneasy. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed and walked with Jay in tow to my kids' room. Alicia was awake in the top bunk. From the soft glow of their night light, I could see her crossing her arms and scowling down at her little brother. I didn't turn on any lights to give myself a better view of the outdoors and peered out the bedroom window. Their window had curtains on it, but for once, they hadn't been drawn all the way, and there was a small opening between them through which Jay must have looked out. One side of the neighbor's house, the one to her left from the street, was visible from Alicia and Jay's room. There were 2 windows on the neighbor's side of the house, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I recalled from what I'd seen in the daylight that the window on the left, the one closest to the front of the house, was the kitchen. I wasn't sure what the window on the right was, as it always had its curtains drawn. I asked Alicia if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "He's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. I never get any sleep, it's not fair." Of course, hearing that made Jay start crying again, so I let him sleep in my room for the night. He has this TMNT indoor camping tent that he prefers to his actual bed. Honestly, at that point, I half suspected his nightmare to be a ploy to get me to let him camp. Anyway, I guess I'm a total pushover because he slept in that tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was again woken up, but this time by Alicia, who was standing over me and shaking my arm. That kid hadn't woken me up in the middle of the night for years. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "The neighbor was making faces at me." Those words, and the fear in my daughter's voice, really put me on edge. I closed the curtains when I said goodnight. "Did you open them?" "Only a little, but it's 'cause I heard a weird noise." "What did you hear?" Alicia couldn't recall exactly. According to her, she had gotten out of bed to see what was going on, and when she lifted the curtain, she saw a light on in the neighbor's window. The curtains in the back room had been drawn back, and our neighbor was standing in his house, right up against the window frame. What was he doing? Alicia thought for a moment, and then made an expression I never want to see on my child's face, or anyone else's for that matter, ever again. I won't do it justice by describing it, but it looked something like this. First, she smiled with both sets of teeth, so that there was a little open sliver between the rows, and then she furrowed her eyebrows. She inclined her head towards me, kind of Kubrick-esque, and strained the muscles in her neck. The worst part, though, was what she did with her hands. She held out her left arm, forearm up. Then she clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth rapidly over her forearm. Poor thing described it as playing the violin, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that my neighbor was pantomiming cutting. Disturbed, I told Alicia to stop and not to make either the expression or the gesture again. I was angry and confused. My neighbor, a man in his 40s, was a bit of a recluse, but he had seemed normal enough in the 3 or 4 times I'd spoken to him. I couldn't fathom why he would do something like that to my kids. After asking Alicia a few more questions, I realized that my neighbor might not have done anything technically, or at least legally, wrong. It wasn't against the law to make inappropriate gestures in your own home, but it seemed like he was targeting my kids specifically. Legal or not, I planned to have a little chat with him the following morning. My last question to Alicia was if our neighbor had made any other gestures, and she nodded. Then, she started making beckoning, come here motions with both of her hands. I had Alicia sleep in my room for the night as well. I also checked out the window in my kids' room, but like before, I saw nothing. The house was completely dark. The next morning, before work and after dropping Alicia and Jay off at school, I spent a good 5 minutes knocking on my neighbor's front door. I figured he was home since his car was in the driveway, but he never answered the door. Eventually, I had to leave for work, and as I was walking away, I turned around quickly to see if he was watching me. He was, the coward. I saw him for a split second at the front window before he ducked beneath the sill and out of view. Clearly, the guy had problems. I yelled out to him to stop messing with us and then left. That same night, I put a plan in motion. While my kids slept in my room, I hung out in theirs. It was a Friday night, and I was ready to pull an all-nighter so that I could catch my neighbor in the act. Although I trusted my kids, I wanted to confirm that there was actually something nefarious going on before I escalated things. I made sure the house was locked up and all the curtains drawn, tucked my kids in, and sat on the floor under the window in their room. At around 9 p.m., I started marathoning midnight mass on my phone. I didn't want to wear headphones and miss any strange sounds, so I kept the volume low and mostly read subtitles. At midnight, I started to hear strange sounds. Like Alicia said, it's a bit hard to describe. Best I can do is that it was this low, repeated clicking sound. You know the chuck-chuck sound you make to beckon a horse? It was something like that. All I knew is that the sound was undoubtedly coming from a person. After a few minutes of this, the sound switched to what I think was supposed to be a whistle, but it came out all wrong, like someone sucking breath in through their teeth. The sound was so crisp that the neighbor's window must have been open, which was an unsettling thought given that there was only around 15 feet of space between our houses. Certain that the neighbor was at his window and that this was my best chance to see him, I stood up and pulled the curtain back in one motion. I saw him right away. There was a dim light on in his room, allowing me to see that horrible expression Alicia had made the night prior. It was one thing to see my child's recreation, but it was far more frightening on an adult. His window was indeed open, and his arms were stuck out into the cold night, violently swiping against each other in a grotesque mimicry of self-harm. When he saw me and realized that he was looking at another grown man and not some poor child, he stopped his erratic motions. His cartoonish grin faded, and another, more genuine emotion settled over his features: rage. The man grabbed the window and slammed it shut, then closed the curtains with the same forcefulness. I let my own curtain fall. I was a little shell-shocked, I think. Of course, I was perturbed by the sight of the man, by his face and his movement, and the fact that he'd been doing that for who knows how many nights now in an attempt to frighten my kids. However, another detail stuck out as even more concerning to me, which was the fact that I genuinely wasn't sure if the man I had just seen was my neighbor. I'd seen him so few times in the years I'd lived in that house, and I was having trouble conjuring up his face. I sat on the floor for a minute, my blood thundering in my ears. I definitely had enough evidence at that point to call the cops, right? Just as I was about to pull out my phone, I heard a tremendous smack against the glass of the bedroom window. After a brief hesitation, I pulled the curtain back again. There were no lights on in the neighbor's house, and there was also no one outside from what I could see. I pulled the curtains back a little further and saw a handprint in the top corner of the window pane. It's worth noting that our house is on a raised foundation and that particular window is very tall, so even though the window is on the first floor, the man outside would have needed an insane vertical to get his hand up there. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I explained the situation to them, I quickly walked around the house to see if I could catch a glimpse of the man. My last stop was my bedroom. Once inside, I locked the doors and, while still on the phone with the operator, I took my handgun out of the safe in my closet. My heart was beating out of my chest, but I knew I had to stay calm, even more so when I saw that Alicia was awake and looking out of the tent at me. I reassured her in as few words as I could, whispering that we were okay, but we had to stay very quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed, my firearm ready and my ears straining. My kid's tent was in the corner, and to the left of the tent, in the middle of the wall and directly across from where I sat, was a window. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something. It was a cloudless night, and the moonlight was bright enough that I could see a silhouette through the white curtains. The dark shape was nebulous at first, but became clearer as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow, he knew which room we were in. The silhouette didn't move for several minutes, and I remember being thankful that, from the angle at which she sat, Alicia couldn't see it. Then, something happened that I couldn't entirely wrap my head around. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, making a Y shape with his body and his limbs. Only, his arms were far too long. They seemed to be double the length that they should have been, each arm about the same length as his entire body. I thought at first that he was holding something, maybe two pipes that just appeared to be an extension of his limbs, but I could clearly see two hands at the ends of the extremities. I could see 5 fingers on each hand, flopping around slightly as the man brought his arms closer to the window. Thud, thud, thud. I stood up and readied myself to shoot, but just then the sounds of sirens pierced the quiet night. The man outside banged his hands against the window one last time, and then it was as if someone had sliced his arms at the elbows. His forearms seemed to shear right off, and the man took off running before they so much as hit the ground. When the police officers announced themselves, I answered the door and explained the situation to them. 2 officers, a man and a woman, asked me a few questions about my neighbor, which I assumed was necessary to establish probable cause for a search. Once finished, they told me to stay inside with the doors locked while they investigated the neighbor's house. I watched them through the window of Alicia and Jay's room. They knocked on the neighbor's door, and when no one answered, they tried the front door handle. I watched the unlocked door swing open. The 2 looked at one another and then entered. I'm not sure what they found inside that house. All I know is that when they emerged a few moments later, they both looked very disturbed. When I went outside to ask what they had found, the female officer told me simply, "Your neighbor's dead." The rest of the night was a blur of strangers in uniforms filing in and out of my neighbor's home. Some came to my porch afterward to ask me questions, and none offered me any answers. They moved with tight-lipped efficiency, their faces guarded, their words clipped. At one point, I wandered to the side of the house and found several people photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could ask me to leave, I made out the gruesome shape of two human arms. The kids and I have been staying in my parents' apartment for months, and I think everyone, even Jay, is getting tired of the cramped living situation. We can't stay in the house. Alicia is way too traumatized for that, and I wouldn't be comfortable staying there while the murderer is still at large anyway. I want to sell the house, but our story going semi-viral is making that difficult. After all, who would want a house that, thanks to the news, has become permanently associated with phrases like dismemberment and days of torture and victim barely recognizable as human? I'm from a small town. I mean small. Nothing much happened other than take your tractor to work day. I was a high school senior in a class of 42 people. We had all known each other since diapers. I could give you the first, middle, and last name of every kid in my class. The biggest thing to happen to our town was the day we got a Starbucks. The only reason we got one was that we were right off the highway, and people passing through would make up for our small population size. Needless to say, we were thrilled. It was a small cafe with nothing much of an inside, but at least it had a drive-thru. The building itself was stacked right next to a strip mall, so it had a tiny parking lot. The actual drive-thru was pinned against a brick wall. Once you were in line, you had no choice but to keep going. This was especially annoying when the people in front of you had long orders. The line could fit about 6 cars back to back, and it was always full. Let me just say, the Starbucks didn't last long. 8 months after it opened, it was shut down. I got to see the reason why firsthand. It was spring break. My mom and I were heading to the mall, which was almost an hour away. It was hot. I was the one who suggested we stop at Starbucks before heading out. My mom didn't want to. She said it was a waste of money. But I nagged her until she agreed. We pulled up to the drive-thru, and there were 4 cars ahead of us. My mom sighed but got in line. 3 more cars pulled in behind us. We were all stuck like peas in a pod, sweating in the heat of the day. I want something cold, I whined to my mom. She rolled her eyes. Strawberries and cream? Yes, please. I pulled out my phone and Snapchatted some friends. Getting fraps with the mom, I typed as I snapped a pic of us. My mom laughed and pushed the phone away. Suddenly, a loud pop filled the air. We looked at each other in surprise. It sounded like a gunshot, I said softly. No way, she responded, shrugging it off. It was probably just a car backfiring. We sat in silence for the next few moments. I think we both sensed something change. Then the scream came. It was a man's. Instinctively, I stuck my head out the window to see what was going on. Because of how packed and we were against the buildings, we couldn't actually open our doors. But I was small enough that I could get half my body out the window to view the scene. There was a figure standing on the hood of a car, about 4 cars ahead of us. He wore a gorilla mask. In his hands was a gun. He had it pointed down toward the windshield. Someone inside the car was screaming, begging for help. My mother pulled me back into the car right before another pop filled the silence. The windshield shattered, and fear lit up the alley. We need to get out of here, my mom said under her breath. She looked around wildly, knowing that we were blocked in. The cars behind us weren't moving, and neither were the cars in front. None of us could open our doors. What the hell? I whimpered. It's going to be okay. My mom put the car in reverse and slammed on the gas. Because we weren't moving, we couldn't get enough speed. She struck the car behind her, which faltered but didn't move. My mom's panic was getting worse. She tried going forward, but the same thing happened. The man in the mask calmly climbed over the car he had just shot into and moved on to the next one. I watched in horror as he tapped on their windshield. There was a couple in the front seat. I could see them holding each other in dismay. "Roll down your window," the masked man said loudly. Seconds ticked by. People in the cars around us were screaming. My mom and I were silent. "Roll it down now." The driver's side window slowly rolled down. We could hear a man's voice from inside. "Please, we have kids in the car. Don't hurt us. We are good people. Please." The masked man leaned toward the open window and fired twice. Blood erupted from the car. Their windows were painted red. Now we could hear the cries of children. My mom grabbed my hand. She swallowed hard. "Get down," she said. "What?" I couldn't comprehend what was happening. "Get down, as far under the seat as possible. He may not see you." "But, Mom..." My words were interrupted by a chorus of gunshots. The kids' cries ceased. Without another word, I folded myself into the space under the dashboard. I got as small as possible. My mom angled her purse next to me, nearly covering the spot I was in. She was breathing hard. A woman's voice pierced the alleyway. Why are you doing this?" I realized it must be the woman trying to get out of her car door. She was stuck between her car and the wall. I shut my eyes, trying not to picture her hanging there, just waiting to be shot down. Even my mom looked away as the shot rang out. Blood sprayed. My mom braced herself against the steering wheel. She looked ahead as if entranced. I sobbed quietly. I could feel the man jump onto our car hood. His footsteps were loud right above us. I glanced toward my mother. She didn't dare look at me. The gorilla mask hung down over the open window on my mom's side. The gun was pointed at her temple. I couldn't see his real face, but I got the feeling he was smiling. My mom suddenly reached out and grabbed the gun. I nearly knocked my head against the dashboard in surprise. The man must have been surprised too, because the gun came easily out of his grip. She aimed upward and pulled the trigger. She shot him as many times as she could before the bullets ran out. Blood was dripping down the windshield and all over her clothes. The mask was covered in holes. She kept pulling the trigger even though nothing came out. I breathed a huge sigh. I couldn't believe she just did that. My mom, a small-town housewife, just killed a murderer. But before I could crawl out, another pop sounded. It came from my side of the car. I watched in horror as my mother's head exploded out of the back of her skull. She fell forward onto the steering wheel, her nose on the horn. I slowly turned my head to my side of the car, where someone wearing a Barbie mask was peering down. She cocked her head to the side, surveying her work. She must not have seen me because she disappeared. I felt her step off her car onto someone else's. I tried to breathe, but nothing came out. I stayed under my seat for nearly an hour. The police arrived within 20 minutes of the first shot, but I couldn't get myself to move. They only found me after using the jaws of life to open up the top of her car to pull my mom out. When the officer saw me, her face crumpled. She could see the fear still etched onto my face. I was the only survivor from the drive-thru. Altogether, 13 people were shot to death, including 3 kids under the age of 10. The man in the gorilla mask was later identified as a radical eco-terrorist. They planned this event to protest Starbucks' impact on the environment. Despite their intent, no one who worked at Starbucks was injured. It was just those of us in line. They never found the other person. My mom died bravely, and I still cling to that. Never in my life would I have expected her to grab a gun from a crazed killer. She did it for me. To save me. There is one thing that still eats me up inside. Because despite their horrible actions, all of the death and destruction those murderers caused, the event actually worked. At least for me. I know I will never go to a Starbucks again. My grandma lived under the house. During the months of June, July, and August, I spent many hot summers of my childhood at my grandmother's house farther west on the island of Cape Breton. The forest was plentiful, the plains were a vibrant green, and my grandmother's house was a rickety old two-story that was built sometime in the 50s and looked like it didn't belong. Despite its shortcomings, my childhood summers spent there were some of the best I ever had. There were no other children to play with for miles toward town, but I made my own fun running through fields of grass and smelling flowers in my grandma's garden. I can still recall the smell of my Nana's butterscotch muffins wafting through an open window, sweet and heavenly, beckoning me inside. I can still remember the sound of cicadas and the warm breeze brushing my skin. I can still remember my grandma's face watching me from underneath the porch step, smiling with all her teeth and calling me to come inside. There were a lot of rules at my grandma's house, like no running inside with my shoes on and no playing in the garden. Some of them didn't make sense to me, like locking the windows and doors before bed, even though we lived miles from society. Turning off the television at 8 and being in bed by 9 was the worst on a night with no school. There were even unspoken rules, ones that I didn't ask my grandma about, things like not sleeping with our arms and legs off the bed, checking the windows and doors twice, not pulling the shower curtain closed all the way, hiding under beds and in closets, or pulling the cord to the attic off the nail it was wrapped around. Though some things were odd, my grandma was a very well-liked woman. She was lithe, and her hair was long, shining a bright silver that looked like it reflected the moonlight. While she usually kept her hair up in a tight bun, making the frown lines on her face prominent, when her hair was down, she could have been called beautiful. When my grandpa was alive, he would call her a silver fox, as once she was young, beautiful, and quick-tempered, but she was the only one who could say something witty and clever to one of my grandpa's quips. Age softened her, her children made her emotional, and my grandpa passing away made her sad and distant, but never once did I question her love for me. Grandpa spent a lot of time out west, so his visits home were rare but wonderful. My grandma used to say she liked having me around when he was gone during the summertime because it made her feel useful. I guess now that I look back on it, my Nana was lonely. I will try to detail the events that happened chronologically, but I was little, and I blocked out a lot of my childhood there with good reason. My grandma lived under the house. I never saw her go to bed once. I never thought too much about it, as I was a big kid who could sleep in a bed alone, with my covers tucked around me and my fingers and toes safely away from the edge of the bed. There were quite a few times, though, that she would visit me from the window, standing in her garden bed to whisper things to me from behind the glass. My grandma's face was pressed up against the window pane, smiling with all her teeth, her hands cupped around her face to see inside a little better. I never questioned it. Why would I? I was just a kid with a silly grandma. There was nothing else to it. "Sweetie, can you open the door for me? I'm a little chilly out here," she told me once, her lips moving just slightly to sound out the words she spoke from behind the glass. The window was up high enough that I could see just above her collarbone, but I noticed she wasn't wearing anything. I laughed a childish laugh and responded with something like, "That's silly, Grandma. You have a key to get inside. Come in before you get cold." My grandma wouldn't respond after this, but her smile would never waver, not for even a second. She was still standing in what would have been my Nana's garden, one of the places my grandma wouldn't let me play. Though she wouldn't say anything directly to me, every time I turned away from the window, I could hear her whisper things. I couldn't make it out, and I thought it could have been just nonsense. I didn't turn around to face her. I was uncomfortable for some reason and would lay in my bed, listening to her mumble incoherent things until I fell asleep. It became like a routine. I would listen to her whisper softly until I slept, and by morning, she would be in the kitchen, making breakfast and pretending like nothing had happened. My grandma would call me silly when I tried to confront her about it, saying I had a vivid imagination, as adults often do with kids. I never really brought it up to her after this. It was like a game between us. Every couple of nights, my grandma would come to the window and tell me to let her inside. Sometimes, she would tell me that I was a good kid. Sometimes, she would say I was a bad child. Once, and only once, did I see her smile drift from her face. She had been pestering me every night since she had started this game between us. I would ask her, beg her, plead with her to just go away and let me sleep, that I was too tired to play and didn't want to anymore. It wasn't until I got aggravated enough to yell at her that she left me alone for a few days, but not for very long. I already told you I don't want to play anymore. Just come inside yourself and go to sleep. Her smile turned into a frown, but the look in her eyes made me uncomfortable. She didn't whisper to me that night, but every few moments, I would turn around and find her watching me, frowning and glaring. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep, but I do remember waking up to the smell of bacon on the frying pan and the sound of my grandma humming a song. One night, I decided to purposefully unlock the door. I waited until my Nana went to bed, crept across the cold floor, unhooked the latches from the front door, and ran to my room to wait underneath the covers for my grandma to finally give the game up. She didn't come to the window that night. She came through my bedroom door. I could hear her get on all fours. I could hear her shuffle across the floor. I could hear her crawl under my bed, and that night, I heard her whispering from underneath my mattress, with my ear pressed up against the bed and the covers pulled over my head. I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. I can smell you. I shifted on the bed, with my back facing the wall and the window. I didn't want to play this game anymore. I can smell your liver. The helplessness of knowing there was no one I could call to wake me up from this bad dream was a feeling I'd like to never experience again. I'm going to crawl into your insides, you little bag of filth. I can't tell you what she continued to whisper to me from underneath my mattress. I blocked a lot of it out, curling myself into my blankets and making sure there were no parts sticking out before I slept. I can tell you that when I opened my eyes a crack, peered out from my blankets, I could see my grandma's eyes watching me from the bottom of my bed. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear, but I did fall asleep and managed to wake up the next day without my Nana watching me from under the bed. If she noticed the unlatched door, she didn't say anything. The look she gave me was a curious side-eye as she put eggs on my plate. I could tell I broke her heart a little when I asked to go home. From that night on, to the next few nights before I went home, I made sure the door was locked twice. She visited me repeatedly until I left. I didn't look at the house getting smaller in the rearview window, feeling like if I did, I might have seen her watching me back. I didn't go back to that house over the summertime. My grandma came to visit me quite a few times at my house, but there was nothing out of the ordinary as far as I can tell. The nightly visits were over, and a few years after that, my grandpa was diagnosed with late-stage Alzheimer's. My grandma and my grandpa were two of the most in-love people you could have met, without being overly showy. My grandpa's sneaky kisses behind the back of grandkids and the smile on my grandma's face when he would ask her for coffee were proof. I could see the pain on her face when she would talk about how he forgot her name again that day or couldn't remember the names of his kids. I watched my grandma suffer through my grandpa's disease as he slipped, and finally slipped away. My grandma died a while after that, hooked up to hospital tubes and being sassy to nurses. Thankfully, She never had to experience the deterioration of her mind as Alzheimer's took her away from us. My grandma was spry, beautiful, clever, and a little weird. It wasn't until we went back to clean her things from her house that I asked my mom about it. She told me a lot of things that I wouldn't have been told as a child. She told me my grandpa was a war veteran who married a much younger girl who worked at a flower shop. They lived in poverty for most of their lives, and when he couldn't afford an engagement ring, he built her a house with his own 2 hands instead. I asked her in the middle of this about my childhood. I didn't mention the things I experienced. I felt like she, too, would have given me a flippant wave and a spiel about my imagination as a kid. Your grandma was a little superstitious. For a short time, we thought that she might have been getting Alzheimer's herself. My mother sighed as she tucked photographs into a cardboard box. There were just little things, like not remembering where she put her keys, forgetting about doing things in her garden. Just little things. Suddenly, I felt like there was a weight lifted off my chest. That could have very well been the explanation for the oddities and the weirdness. I felt kind of rude saying it out loud myself. My mother got me to help her pack boxes into the back of her car, ready to start moving out her things from the house and let it become an abandoned shack in the middle of nowhere. When we finished packing, I hopped in the passenger seat, lit up a smoke, and looked back to give one final farewell to the place where I spent a lot of time with my favorite grandma in the world. The only thing is, as we were driving back home, why did I see her watching me from underneath the step with a smile on her face and far too many teeth? My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours. So, I got home at around 11 p.m. A late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of substances and spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close to passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything as he walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I've been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remember waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone and checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m., from what I remember. I was starving, so I got up and began walking toward the fridge. And then I noticed it. A soft, but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head, drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch. My roommate coming home. The shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe you went to bed and forgot to turn it off? I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell? Realizing the implications of this, I rushed toward his room but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. Hey man, you alright? No response. I considered kicking the door down but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the heck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, so I get out of there, go back into the living room, and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move toward it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up toward the apartment. Soon, I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away. But there was something about it that drove me toward a different conclusion, that this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my good instinct was to get the heck away from it. But the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as crazy. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon, I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single, muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon, I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos, officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found two nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall? And one of the most unsettling ones. Have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange things that had happened after my roommate had moved in, things that I had written off as figments of my imagination simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time when I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered. But as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I really don't know. I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A freaking fire. Update. I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower. I recently moved into a new apartment with my dog, Marbles. It's not a nice place, by any means, but it's the only option I had. I'm just starting a new job, and I barely have enough money to cover rent, ramen, dog food, and a Netflix subscription. So, I settled on this small, dirt cheap apartment on the outskirts of town, partly because it's cheap and partly because it's pet friendly. No, it isn't ideal, but it's only temporary while I save up some cash. The apartment is small, with only 3 rooms. The first room you enter is the kitchen/living room, with a hallway in the back. The door at the end of the hall leads to the bathroom. In the hallway is a door on the right side to the bedroom. I don't have any furnishings or personal belongings, so the apartment remained very bare. I never bothered to worry about sprucing the place up because it was just a temporary home. We had been in the apartment for a few weeks and everything had been fine. As we really settled into the place, Marbles took a liking to the couch in the living room. It wasn't my couch, it came with the apartment. Well, Marbles started sleeping on the couch at night. That said, Marbles likes to get up and relocate in the middle of the night. She would get up and come to the bedroom door and hope to get inside. I always sleep with the door closed, so she would start to whine and paw at the door. Marbles had long nails that she hated getting cut, so you could hear her walking throughout the apartment if you were awake, and it made her pawing pretty loud. After a few nights of this, I just started leaving the door open for her. From then on, she would come and get in the bed with me at all times of the night. This never bothered me. Many more weeks went by with nothing noteworthy happening. Well, one weekend, my Netflix binging session lasted much longer than usual, and I was still up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was just wrapping up Stranger Things Season 2 when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. In the doorway to the hall, there was something peeking at me. I turned to look directly at it. It looked like the top half of a face, peeking from the left side of the doorway. The only thing I could see were two eyes, beady and black, staring at me. I was frozen, not sure if it was fear or shock stopping me from moving. I blinked. It was still there. After a few more seconds, I started panicking and yelled out, "Who are you? Get out!" For a few more seconds, it kept staring, and then slowly began to pull away and out of view. Once I could no longer see it, it took a few moments to regain control of my body. Once I had, I jumped up and slammed the door, locking it. Marbles, who had been laying on the bed with me, was now sitting up and alert. I called the police and told them someone had broken into my apartment. After a while, I heard them knocking on the front door. Eventually, I mustered the courage to step out from the room and run to the front door. They investigated, and the landlord was called. No one was found in the apartment, and when the police had arrived, the front door was still locked from when I got home. There were no signs of breaking and entering, but I insisted that I saw someone. The police did one more sweep of the apartment before leaving, telling me that there was nothing more they could do. The landlord, to whom I must give credit, swapped out the locks the next day, giving me all new keys. He told me that it was possible a previous tenant still had a set of keys to the room and had come in. The thought unnerved me, but the more I thought back on it, the less human the thing seemed to be. It took a few weeks and many sleepless nights to go back to normal, if you could call it that. I told myself that I could handle the stress, that we would only be here a little while longer. During that time, I also bought a baseball bat, which I now kept beside my bed. Now, I still kept the door to the bedroom open at night, but only slightly ajar so Marbles could slip in or out. I didn't feel comfortable seeing the doorway where that thing had been. One night, Marbles came in and hopped up on the bed like she usually does. She settled down and rested her head on my thigh, a common occurrence. I had been asleep and never bothered to open my eyes. I started drifting back off to sleep when I heard a sound. It was a familiar sound of scratching on the floor. It was Marbles' nails on the floor as she walked. It came from the living room and was approaching the bedroom door. I was facing the side of the room with the door, and I opened my eyes. Marbles was there, pushing the door open and coming in. A chill ran up my spine. Slowly, I looked over and down at the bed. It was there. The thing was resting its head on my thigh, looking right into my eyes. For a second, I got a look at it. It had a humanoid form, but it was impossibly inhuman. Its face was horrific, with those beady black eyes, long greasy black hair, and a mouth without lips. Its body was elongated, and it looked as though it was made up of only bones with skin wrapped tightly around them. Its face started to creep closer to mine, and I was finally able to move. I threw the blanket over the thing and jumped out of the bed, running to the front door. I could hear it scurrying behind me, along with Marbles running behind. When I got to the door, I turned to see both Marbles and the thing following. Marbles made it to the door first, and once she was out, I slammed the door closed. I heard and felt the thing slam against the door, scratching and banging against it. I could also hear its raspy breathing. Eventually, it all went quiet. My phone was still inside, but after a while, one of the neighbors opened the door after frantic knocking. They phoned the police for me. The police weren't as friendly this time, but I told them I trapped the person inside my apartment. After a long search of the entire apartment, the police found nothing. I couldn't believe it. They scolded me and told me that if I called for this again, I'd be arrested. I felt like I was going insane. Refusing to go back in alone, the landlord accompanied me while I packed up all my belongings. I wasn't staying here any longer. My parents had an extra room they offered me, and it was going to take a long time before I felt comfortable being alone again. I'm typing this all out from my parents' house, laying in the guest room. Well, a few paragraphs ago, I noticed something. Over in the corner is a closet with folding doors. It's slightly open, and in the crack of the doors, I can see two beady black eyes staring right at me. There's a reason most truckers don't stop for hitchhikers. You know how in college, or when you're just dirt poor, you come to enjoy certain cheap foods? Like ramen, microwave burritos, and frozen pizza. I figure it's the same principle with long-haul drivers and truck stops. I'd only been on the road for 2 years at that point, and I'd only be on it for another 3 after, but I'd already grown a taste for greasy sausages and bad coffee. This time, I couldn't enjoy the crappy meal on account of the man sitting 2 booths over. His appearance and clothes were normal enough, though a bit underdressed for the Colorado winter. I think it was the way he stared, scanning the room like the damn Terminator, that creeped me out. All he had in front of him was an untouched cup of decaf. I usually savored these little breaks, but this time I hurried to finish, partly to beat the weather and partly to get out from under those eyes. Before the waitress came with my check, the man took a seat in the booth across from me without asking. "You a trucker?" He had one of those accents that's impossible to place. "Yeah. Would you allow me to ride with you?" he said with an off-putting smile. "What, to anywhere? You some sort of drifter?" "I have been for some time, but I'm heading home now. I haven't been home in so long." "Shoot, you don't even know where I'm going." He blinked at that, the first time I'd seen the gesture from him. Then his smile widened. "Oh, going over Vale Pass?" Yeah. To Junction. And then? Salt Lake." I knew this wasn't the 60s, and big rigs weren't held up by the mob anymore. Even still, I figured if he asked where I was headed next, I'd lie. "You are definitely going where I need to go. I'd very much appreciate a lift. I'd like to help." That was a lie. But I'm not really supposed to pick up hitchhikers. Company vehicle, C. I'm not sure how long the waitress had been there, but enough, I suppose, because she leaned in and whispered, "Please take him out of here. I'll comp your meal, but he's been here all day, eyeing me funny. Please." Never learned how to say no to women, so I sighed and told the stranger to follow me. "What's your name?" I asked as he took a seat. He shifted his weight and said, "We don't need to know each other's names." Then added, "Call me whatever you'd like." "Fine by me," I said, not curious a bit about his name or story. I had a piece of jerky on the dash. "How about Jim?" if you'd like. Sorry, I said after a few chilly minutes of uncomfortable silence. The heater doesn't work all that great. It'll be nice to get home, he said. It's so much warmer than here. About that time, the snow started coming down thick, and I cut my speed in half. Another rig, chains on the tires, was tearing down the mountain, clearly not happy to be stuck behind me. I took the next pull off, and the driver flashed his hazards and thanks. What are we doing? Asked Jim after the familiar hiss of the air brakes quieted. Checking the weather report. Strapping up the wheels, maybe. Said Jim, his smile gone and brow creased. Then he nodded. All right. I suppose that'll be fine. I hadn't asked his opinion, but whatever. My phone was lucky to get any service, but I got my answers. Snow was expected to come in waves for several more hours. On this mountain, weather like that had been the end of more than one long hauler. I wasn't desperate enough for cash to risk it. I hate to do this to you, Jim, I said, sincere. 4 or 5 hours parked with my new friend did not sound fun. But we're stuck here. We don't look stuck. I just mean it wouldn't be safe to keep driving. I'll help you put the chains on, Jim said, his smile back. Nah, sorry, I don't push it going downhill on a snowy mountain. But I need to get home. It's just a few hours. He shook his head, empty smile once again vanished. You don't understand. If we don't go now, I won't make it home until who knows when. It's a place, man. It isn't going anywhere. Jim paused. Yes, it isn't going anywhere. At least we agreed. His eyes followed a van with a driver apparently braver than myself. You wishing you'd hitched a ride with him? I asked. And he squinted, then, almost like he was trying to read the license plate. No, they aren't going where I'm going. That's too bad then, but I'll still be headed toward your home after the weather clears. No, you won't. I shivered, and I don't think it was the cold. Don't you have a job to do? Said Jim. I started to get angry then, or maybe I was afraid, but I was shaking either way. Look, I can handle my own business, Jim. Nothing in this trailer is perishable. If I'm a little late, I'm a little late. No, he shouted, and I swear for a moment his face barely looked human. I insist you drive now. He was like a small child, throwing a tantrum. All right, that's enough, I said, hand ready to dart for the glove box where I kept my magnum. But I swear Jim's eyes bore right through the plastic, and he knew I was packing. Okay, my voice cracked. I don't like doing this, but you're freaking me out. I need you to leave. Now. My eyes not leaving my passengers, my right hand still ready to grab the gun, I used my left to fish around for a bag, a bottle of water, my spare coat, and a few sticks of jerky. I tossed it all on Jim's lap. The diner's only a couple miles back. Just stay off the shoulder, and you should be fine. He just stared, motionless. I almost wished he would explode again. This is my truck. I'm telling you to leave. I won't need these, he said, dropping the coat and bag but taking the jerky from my dash. He didn't seem angry anymore. Sad, maybe. And then he hopped out. Wait, it's 10 degrees, I yelled. Grabbing the gun and coat, I darted outside, wincing at the wind. There was no sign of Jim, and his tracks stopped after 10 feet or so. I considered calling out, but I guess I was too relieved. Maybe that makes me a lousy person, I don't know. But I got back in the cab, locked both doors, kept my revolver handy, and didn't sleep a wink until Grand Junction 10 hours later. Now, I'm sure he was just some lunatic I picked up at a diner. I know that. But sometimes, on snowy March nights, I can't help but wonder. Sometimes I wonder. My son, Noah, became friends with Alex when he moved into the house next to ours last year. Alex and his family had relocated from California. When we went over to introduce ourselves, the two boys became instant friends. While my husband, Ryan, and I chatted with Alex's parents, Alex and Noah played together and discovered they had quite a bit in common. Noah was 4 at the time, and Alex was 2 years older, making him 6. The two quickly became inseparable. After school, Alex would come over to our house, and they'd watch Pokemon, play video games on the Xbox, or run around outside doing whatever kids do. Some weekends, Noah stayed at Alex's house, and other weekends, Alex stayed with us. Ryan and I often went out with Heather and Kevin, Alex's parents, bringing the boys along. They spent nearly every day together, and since they were both only children, it was heartwarming to see them form such a close bond. In July, Ryan and I decided to take the boys to Holiday World in Santa Claus, Indiana. Living in Huntingburg, it was only about a half-hour drive. We planned to leave at 10 a.m. so we could arrive right after the park opened. The day before our trip, Alex was at our house, playing Donkey Kong with Noah on Ryan's old SNES. Heather was coming to pick Alex up at 6 p.m. so they could go to the mall and get new swim trunks for the trip. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when Alex approached me. "Livia, can I have some Kool-Aid, please?" "Sure thing, bud. Your mom will be here soon," I said, smiling at him. I had grown quite fond of Alex, grateful for the joy he brought to Noah's life. I dried my hands, grabbed a cup from the cabinet, and poured his drink. Just as I handed it to him, Heather honked outside. Alex gulped down the Kool-Aid, thanked me, and ran out the door. "Bye, Alex." I called after him, watching from the kitchen window as he climbed into the car with his mom, and they drove off. The next morning, I was up at 6 a.m., as usual, brewing coffee and scrolling through Facebook. A sleepy Noah came down the hallway, rubbing his eyes and yawning. I smiled at my beautiful son and pulled him onto my lap. I brushed his dirty blonde hair out of his eyes. "Are you ready to ride some rides today?" I asked, excited myself. It had been a couple of years since I'd visited an amusement park. Noah looked at me with his big, blue eyes and said, "I don't think we can go, Mommy." I frowned. "Why do you say that, Noah?" He looked down at his hands, picking at his fingernails. "Last night, when I was sleeping, Alex told me we couldn't play anymore." I assumed he was talking about a dream. "Baby, you were just dreaming." Noah shook his head. "No, Mommy. He was hurt really bad. He told me the next time I saw him, he'd be in a box." I stared at my son for a long time until he got up and went back to his room. I didn't know what to think. He seemed so serious, but I figured the dream had unsettled him. Still, I couldn't shake the awful feeling in my stomach, so I picked up the phone to call Heather. When she answered, she was bawling. I could barely understand her through her sobs. Alex had been hit by a car in the mall parking lot the night before. Heather said he ran out without looking, and a car going slightly too fast struck him. Alex didn't survive. As Heather described what happened, I wanted to hang up and process the fact that my son's best friend was gone and that somehow Noah already knew. But instead, I stayed on the line, trying to comfort her. When she broke down again, I hurried off the phone. I sat there, stunned, trying to comprehend what I just heard. When Ryan woke up, I told him what happened but left out Noah's comments. I don't know why, but it didn't feel right to tell him. The services were held a few days later. Surprisingly, it was an open casket funeral. The funeral home had done a good job repairing the damage. Even though I didn't want Noah to attend, Ryan thought it would be better for him to say goodbye. As we stood in front of the casket, Noah just stared. I wasn't sure if he didn't fully understand or if he was just in shock. He simply stared at Alex. I held his little hand and tried to keep my tears at bay. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "This is the box, Mommy." That was 8 months ago. Since then, we've moved to a small town in western Kentucky. Noah has made new friends, but none like Alex. You're probably wondering why I'm sharing this now, so long after it happened. Well, something else happened yesterday. I was at the living room computer, working on a paper for my social work class. I decided to go back to school. Noah was sitting on the couch watching Adventure Time. "Mommy," he said. I turned to look at him. "Yes, sweetie?" I saw Alex today. Chills ran down my spine, and every hair on my arm stood up. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself this was just his way of coping. Though it had been months since the funeral, Noah occasionally brought Alex up, saying he missed him or wished he were still here. But this was the first time he mentioned seeing him. I wasn't sure how to respond. What do you say when your 5-year-old tells you he saw his dead best friend? I only knew one thing to ask. The next time you see Alex, will you ask him what the last thing I did for him was? Noah turned his head toward the recliner beside my desk. "What was the last thing Mommy did for you?" He paused for a few seconds, then turned back to me. "Made him a glass of Kool-Aid." Something horrible arrived with the rain. I'm visiting my brother's cabin in Washington State. He let me come here after my divorce to get away from all the nonsense and clear my head for a couple of weeks. It's beautiful out here, the quaint little hut exactly what I had been expecting. It's surrounded by dense forest, and you have to take a long dirt road to reach it. It's wonderful. Before I arrived, my brother informed me that he had stocked the hut with groceries, enough to last a month if I decided I wanted to stay that long. He was leaving it up to me, knowing what hell my breakup had been. I had lost almost everything, and as a gesture of goodwill, he had extended a hand and offered his cabin to me. It was a welcome sanctuary, and upon arrival, I found myself blissfully calm. The woods were alive with sound, the creak of wood, the gentle rustle of wind through the leaves, the chirp of birds in conversation. It was all so serene. The first couple of days were wonderful, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. The horrible legal battle I had been engaged in with my wife had taken the wind out of my sails, but out here I let the warm breeze envelope me with new life and energy. To my surprise, it had been beautiful the first couple of days, the gentle golden rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy of green overhead. The first 3 days, I spent a lot of time walking through the woods, isolated from everything and everyone. I was alone out here, a stranger to the surrounding green kingdom. I let my mind wander free from the chains it had been bound with, my thoughts drifting towards what I would do with my new life. Possibilities began to blossom before me, and I actually started discovering hope in my future again. But then the rain came. I had heard on the news that a 7-day storm was headed my way, so it came as no surprise when the sky darkened. As a resident of Washington, I was no stranger to long bouts of rain, and this was no different. I had just finished eating dinner when the rain started, gentle pitter-patters on the roof that eventually evolved into a full-blown gale. I started a fire and pulled a chair up to the window, watching the storm. It was cozy, and I found peace in watching the chaos that I was protected from. And then I heard something on the roof. I cocked my ear to listen, the small cabin lit only by the glow of the fireplace. At first, I thought it was just the rain, but after a few moments, I realized it sounded like someone was running around up there. I didn't know what to make of it, assuming it had to be some kind of animal, but it sounded much bigger. I grabbed the blanket off the chair I was sitting in and pulled it up to my chin, creeped out by the noise. After a little bit, the sound stopped. My heart was in my throat, and my eyes darted to the front door. Thunder boomed overhead, and I suddenly felt incredibly far away from civilization. I shivered, despite the fire, and turned my eyes to look out the window I was sitting in front of. Lightning flashed, and I suddenly leaned forward, heart racing. Something wasn't right out there. I thought my eyes had to be playing tricks on me, and I anxiously waited for more lightning. I forced myself to calm down, sure that what I had just seen was paranoia brought on by fear. The world was illuminated once again by a bright blast of lightning, and my eyes went wide. Mere feet from the window, the rain seemed to bend around the shapes of three invisible figures. They stood about 6 feet tall, the rain outlining their still forms. I swallowed hard, waiting for another blast of lightning, and when it came, the shapes remained. They were immobile, and I suddenly felt eyes on me, as if they had come with the storm to watch me. I retreated from the window, feeling exposed and afraid, and went and sat on my bed. I was terrified, so shaken by the bizarre forms that I began to have a hard time breathing. I took a few long, deep pulls of air, willing myself to settle down. As my heart rate slowed, I started convincing myself that I had imagined the shapes. Between the rain and the dark, it was easy to mistake shadows and shapes that weren't actually there. Just as I was about to get back up, I heard something walking on the roof again. I gripped the sides of my bed as I listened to the heavy footsteps walk closer and then finally stop directly over my head. I crawled between my covers and held my breath, eyes wide in a panic. What was out there? Another flash of lightning lit the sky, and I glanced at the window. It was right there, its invisible form parting the rain like a curtain. It was watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the covers over my head. I heard myself whimpering and slapped a hand over my mouth. What were these things? What did they want? And then a thought slammed into me with the force of a locomotive. Where was the third one? And that's when I heard the front door crash open. I cried out in fear, shaking like a child as heavy, with footsteps walked across the cabin towards me. It stopped by the side of my bed, and I felt drops of water falling from its body onto my blanket. I could hear it breathing, a sucking sound pulled deep into its moist lungs. As I bawled into myself under the covers, terrified, it spoke. Look at me. Its voice sounded like rain, an odd stuttered inflection of its vocal cords. I didn't move, didn't breathe, praying that this nightmare would end. I didn't know what these things were, what they wanted, but I sensed danger. I sensed they wanted to hurt me. And I sensed that if I looked at them, they could. I stayed balled up under my blankets and kept my trembling mouth shut. Look at me, it repeated in the same wet voice, its words dribbling from its mouth like running water. Again, I didn't move. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. I kept my eyes closed and the blanket firmly over me. My stomach churned with terror, and my breath was hot in the enclosed space. I don't know how long I waited. Eventually, I heard the thing retreat, slamming the door behind it. Even with it gone, I remained where I was, refusing to move. I listened to the rain crash down above me, the relentless storm never ceasing in its violence. I don't know if I fell asleep or passed out, but the next thing I remember was opening my eyes to dim gray light. I hesitantly pulled the blanket from me and surveyed the cabin. The fire had died out, and the scene before me was still in the early morning light. The rain still thundered overhead as sheets of it were driven from the dark sky. I slowly got out of bed and went to the window. "Please," I muttered, voice cracking. The three figures stared back at me, the rain outlining their still forms. I dropped to the floor, out of sight, a hand to my chest. I crawled over to the small kitchen and reached up to retrieve my cell phone. It wasn't there, I jumped to my feet, scouring the surface for where I knew I left it the previous night. It was gone, but a long, wet, dark smudge stained the wood, starting at the center and running to the edge. That thing had taken my phone. I was trapped. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. "What do you want from me?" The storm offered me no answer. "Leave me alone," I whispered. "Just leave me alone, please." It's been 3 weeks. The storm hasn't ceased. I don't know what's happened. Something is seriously wrong. The sky remains a dim gray, the day-night cycle stuck in some horrific limbo. I don't think I'm ever getting out of this cabin. I'm almost out of food, and I wonder how long I can last before starvation drives me outside these walls. They're still there, the endless rain painting their figures in the air. They watch, always, they watch. When I hear one of them running across the roof, I sprint to my bed and bury myself under the covers. As soon as I do, another slams the front door open and comes to stand over me. It tells me to look at it, commands me to look at it. I can't. I won't. Something about its voice has begun to sound familiar. The more it speaks to me, the more I have begun to recognize it. It sounds like me. And last night, when one of them was standing over my bed, it said something different. It told me that things should have been different. It told me it was disappointed in the way my life had turned out. It told me I needed to acknowledge my mistakes. It told me it was time to let another one of them try. Never leave a chair empty at night. You don't know who might take a seat. We were pretty superstitious. All of us were. My mom, my dad, grandparents, teachers, neighbors, coaches, and bus drivers. We lived our lives by many traditions that might seem naive and old-fashioned at first glance. There is a simple reason for us having them, though. We all lived fine and well, obeying the communal gut feeling, and it never disappointed as long as we listened to our sayings. Not all of them sounded as inherently disturbing as the empty chair, of course. Some were just signs we looked out for. Like, if there's a butterfly in your house, it means you will get visitors soon. Others were little tricks that could ease your life. Like, if you want visitors to leave your home, a bit of salt poured into their shoes will do the trick. And some were, well, a bit disturbing, I guess. Like, if you lean over a railing, the devil will grab you and pull you towards the ground. That one we can't really fact check, unfortunately. As I said, there were many of those phrases they kept repeating so nobody would ever forget. And the one I've heard the most in my life happens to be the one about the chair. Never leave a chair in your bedroom empty at night. Dad repeated it every night like a prayer while I was still little. And Mom would come by later in the evening to make sure I had a backpack, some books, or even just a jacket lying on my desk chair. It was the only one in my room. As I grew older, they didn't need to remind me anymore. The phrase was deeply ingrained into my brain. I still heard Mom's footsteps at night, though. I suppose she wanted to be really sure nobody would be taking a seat next to me at night. When I was younger, I didn't understand why this was so important to everyone I knew. To me, there was one simple solution to the whole hex altogether, simply not having a chair in your room. You don't really need it when you have your bed anyway, except for doing homework, maybe. Unfortunately, however, removing the chair is not an option. And there's a reason for that, too, of course. As I said, superstitions are kind of our thing. As terribly afraid as the people of our community were of forgetting an empty chair, they were even more anxious about what might happen if there was no chair at all. You want to have a space for someone who might visit. You simply don't want them to visit without your approval first. It's a very strange concept, and I can't quite say how it even started. I suppose it's something our village people made up a long time ago. Someone probably once tried to remove their chair and was met with terrible fortune, so they took the risk of having the chair in their rooms with items stacked on top. I never cared for the strange ideas and superstitions of our community much, not until I understood what happens when you don't listen to them. You can never have every single member of a community obeying the same rules. Some people are inherently against going with the flow, risk takers, show-offs, and adrenaline junkies. Then you have the ones who never listened much as kids and grew up not caring for old traditions. Especially when they read and watch all kinds of horror stories and start to realize that something isn't necessarily scary just because someone says so. I suppose many kids now just think that the whole saying is a way for their parents to make sure they keep their rooms clean. And so, of course, there were the ones who intentionally kept a chair, or even more, welcomingly empty for whoever might visit at night. They called themselves brave. We call them cautionary tales, because they all would regret it when the visitor came. The story I know the best is the one of Billy Tucker. Billy never cared much for any of the tales the older ones tell. Billy liked to tempt fate more than anything. While he lived with his parents, they made sure he was safe, even if he didn't approve, but Billy grew older and bought his own little home on the same street as us. It was the very first night that he would sleep there alone, and I suppose he forgot about the chair. Or possibly he just wanted to see what would happen if he ignored the phrases that had been shoved in his head all his life. I saw him getting his mail the following day. He looked tired and disturbed. He told me he kept thinking there was someone inside his home, but that wasn't possible. Nobody ever broke into a house around here. He told me he heard someone whisper in his ear to wake him up. When he looked around, he saw nothing but a jacket that wasn't there before, hanging by his closet. You know, it was probably my ma. That woman is anxiety personified, Billy joked back then. That was the first day. After that, Billy hardly left his home anymore. I'd see his parents stop by at times to bring him food, but he never stepped outside. Apparently, he was slowly but surely losing his mind. It lasted a week until his parents found him hanging from his bedroom closet. It was a devastating tragedy for sure, but I wasn't completely convinced that it had anything to do with the chair. Billy had been a troubled kid, that was no secret. However, whether I really believed in it or not didn't matter. My gut feeling had merged with that of the community. Whether I was afraid of the empty chair or not, as long as I lived in this strange village with all its rules and sayings, I would stick with them. Even if it was just for the sake of my parents' mental health. And I did. All those years. Until I moved far away from the village. Living in a big city was far different than anything I'd ever imagined. I suddenly had a sense of freedom I never perceived before. At first, it was overwhelming, all the places I could go to and all the things I could do, but after a while, I realized that this was exactly where I belonged. I found new friends, got a nice studio apartment, and a new sense of my own identity. But of course, the words I heard all my life stuck with me, even far away from our village. I suppose a part of me believed in the superstitions at least to some degree, but I always believed that I left them with me at my old home. I didn't believe they would follow me. Not until the night. I came home rather late after drinking at the pub with a few friends. I could hardly keep my eyes open and went to bed pretty swiftly. With the last bit of consciousness, I heard the bag on the chair in my room slip to the ground. My gut kept telling me to go and pick it up, but my drunken and tired mind said that everything would be fine. I should have listened to the gut. It was still pitch dark out when I woke up by the sounds. It sounded as if someone was moving inside my apartment. At first, I didn't register much. I guess for a moment, I forgot that I lived alone. When the realization came to me, my eyes opened wide. My heart started racing, and I had to control my breathing. I collected all my courage and quietly moved my upper body up so that I could inspect my surroundings. There was nobody there, at least as far as I could tell with the dim light shining through my window. To calm my nerves, I got up from the bed and turned on the lights. The good thing about a studio apartment is there aren't many rooms where someone could hide. I checked behind the corner where my kitchen island was. I checked under my bed and in the bathroom. There was no sign of someone being inside, until I saw the coat rack. Most of my jackets are black, so I didn't notice right away, but there was a coat that didn't belong to me, as well as a black top hat. My eyes moved to the ground, and when I saw the big leathery shoes with dirt underneath them, my entire body started shaking. "Hello?" I called out into the empty room. There was no response. Of course, I called the police, and they checked every single corner, but there was not a single sign of anyone breaking in. As they arrived, the coat and shoes were gone, but I still saw the dirt stains on the ground. The police were clueless. I'm not sure whether they thought I was insane or on substances, but finally, they left, and I was alone again. A part of me wondered if I possibly dreamed it all up or if I mixed up the coat with one of my own, but in the end, I knew I was just lying to myself. Someone had been in here, and it was my own fault for leaving the chair empty. I figured there was one simple solution to my problem, so the following evening, I made sure to stack enough items on top of that chair to make sure nobody would even think about taking a seat in there. It seemed like a decent plan, considering the ridiculous superstition I was following. I didn't realize, however, that there wasn't going back after you messed up once. That's what happened to Billy. On the first night, you questioned the act. You can't believe that there could be anything true to that old saying, and how could it? You make yourself completely paranoid. The following night, I was still confident, at least to some degree. The fear was still very much present, but I believed I had a solution. I had books and clothes stacked upon my chair, and after a couple of hours of tossing in my bed, I managed to fall asleep. What you don't realize is the effect the visitor has on you. It starts nibbling on your mind. If you invite it inside once, it learns your scent and it will continue coming back each night. No matter where you go or if you stay up all night. It won't stop. Until your mind can't take it anymore. I knew that. I'd heard all the stories. I just never believed how cursed we truly were. That night, I woke up by the sound of a whisper. The words made no sense to my mind, but they were near and felt thoroughly unkind. A hand was caressing my face, but when I opened my eyes, there was nobody to see. The next day, I thought about staying with a friend, but I was afraid I might burden them with the same fate if it followed me. So I got a hotel room instead. I woke up when I heard a hollow laugh. It didn't stop until the sun came up again. For days, I didn't sleep. Wherever I went, I knew it was there with me, chewing on my mind and swallowing my free will. As the days progressed, the whispers became clearer. It was as if it was pulling me over to a side where we could communicate. A side where I could make sense of its words. Come with me. You won't be missed. Your choice has already been made. The voice was omnipresent. It kept whispering and laughing until every moment of my life was drained in the color of nothingness. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't feel. I was just afraid that if it pulled hard enough, I wouldn't be able to come back. Just like Billy. We were pretty superstitious. All of us were. We all lived fine and well obeying the communal gut feeling, and it never disappointed as long as we listened to our sayings. I thought about that when every other thought in my mind stopped making sense. I thought about the things I was told ever since I was a child. The words that might even be able to help your life. Like if you want a visitor to leave your home, a bit of salt poured into their shoes will do the trick. It was a long shot, but the visitor was always polite enough to leave its shoes and coat by the door. I don't know how permanent the trick is, but last night I finally slept on my own again. My family and I have been going through a very strange experience over the last couple of months. It's hard to even put into words or explain what is going on. I guess I can just start off from where it all started to feel off. A few months back, my family had a big get-together. My parents both have 2 siblings. They all got married and had some kids. Well, all of them except Uncle Matt. He never got married or had kids. That means I have 10 cousins. My aunts and uncles all live within 2 hours of us, so we've all grown up together. That being said, we don't normally have all my aunts and uncles in a house at once. This was a rare occasion to have a family meal when they were all free. I will not be naming every single family member in this post because that seems like a lot of information, and honestly, you've already gotten more information about my family than you ever wanted, but I promise this context is important. Okay, enough with my babbling. Let's talk about what happened that weird night. My parents and I went over to my Aunt Margot and Uncle Ken's house for a barbecue in the backyard. The backyard felt loud and chaotic. I tried to stay out of the way and get the night over with. I was honestly just there for the free food. We were all sitting down at a big table outside. I was so focused on making sure none of the napkins went flying in the wind, I wasn't listening to the conversation. My Aunt Margot came over to the table with a plate of really burnt hot dogs. My mom immediately started to laugh at the sight of them. Is burning food genetic or something? How on earth do you guys always do that to food? The Jensens need to leave the cooking to the Millers? My mom said with a sarcastic giggle. Uncle Ken looked at her confused. What are you on about, Liz? Uncle Ken snapped back. I mean, Margot burnt the hot dogs, and Matt always burns food when he cooks. Remember we had to ban him for months from cooking because we had to order takeout like 3 times in a row? Everyone at the table laughed, recalling their memories. Sighs of recollection bounced back and forth from person to person when my dad spoke up in Aunt Margot's defense. Honey, what are you talking about? Matt is your brother. I really shouldn't have to remind you of that. My mom rolled her eyes in response to my dad. I spoke up because I was suddenly confused about which side of the family Uncle Matt was actually on. You would think I would naturally just know that, but all my aunts and uncles act like siblings and call each other their siblings. My grandparents often refer to their son/daughter-in-laws as just their kids, so it isn't something I always think about. Wait, I'm confused. Whose side is Uncle Matt on? What is the joke? I don't get it. I asked, but was only met with a laugh from all the parents at the table. I finally got an answer from my mom following the silence of the joke that somehow went over my head. Don't be silly, baby, Matt is your dad's brother. As the words left her mouth, half the table looked confused. Liz, what are you talking about? He is on your side. He is a Miller. My Aunt Margot said as she scraped off the burnt edges of her hot dog. Okay, now I'm with Amanda. I don't get the joke. My mom said while looking at me with narrow, inquisitive eyes and then at the rest of the group. Wait, everyone slow down. Aunt June said, speaking up for probably the first time in the night. This is dumb. Matt is not Liz and I's brother. He has to be on the Jensen side of the family. I sat at the table, watching my family in silence. Their eyes darted back and forth. They stopped laughing and were all just scratching their heads. After a few minutes, my mom got her phone. She found an old family photo from when she was a kid. In the photo were my grandparents, my Uncle Paul, and my Aunt June. Nothing out of the ordinary. After looking at the picture, Aunt Margot got her phone and looked for an old childhood photo. Aha! Found one, she stated as she showed off the photo on her phone. Yet again, the photo was normal. It had my grandparents, my dad, Aunt Margot, and Aunt Susan. The next hour consisted of both sides of the family going back and forth showing photos. None of them with Uncle Matt in them. I had a few of my cousins there, but they all lost interest once they ate. I, on the other hand, couldn't be pulled away. I was engrossed in learning where the heck Uncle Matt came from. They kept talking back and forth. They figured maybe he wasn't anyone's sibling. Maybe he was related by marriage or a second cousin twice removed that I just called Uncle Matt because that was the easiest thing to call him. We all have a relative like that, right? I know an easy solution you might be thinking of is to just call him up. That's also what I said, but he was working and they didn't want to interrupt him. But guess what? I needed answers, so I decided to call him. However, when I looked at my phone, I couldn't find him in my contacts. I looked through it multiple times. I remembered texting him about something a few days back, so he should have been in my text history. Still nothing. After being weirded out by his contact being gone, I mentioned out loud that someone should call him, regardless of him being at work. No one agreed with me, but once I told them his contact was missing from my phone, they all got curious and looked to see if he was missing for them too. We were all in shock to find him missing from all our phones. The family started to dig through their camera rolls and any digital libraries they had to try and find any photo of him. Uncle Andrew thought he had a photo of the back of him, but we soon found that we all remembered him looking differently. Uncle Andrew showed a picture of the back of a bald man who looked pretty tall. Aunt June called him crazy and recalled him having long, curly red hair. It wasn't like we hadn't seen him in a year or that he was some kind of distant memory. I saw the guy last week. He came over to my house to help me with some homework, and I can tell you he didn't have red hair or no hair at all. He was, well, shoot. I can't remember what he looked like now that I think about it. It was safe to say we were all creeped out. As the sun went down and it got chilly out, the group moved inside. Normally, this is when everyone would go home, but I saw Aunt Margot start a pot of coffee. It was going to be a long night. The air was tense and full of unease. None of the adults wanted to go home until they had answers. I could tell the adults wanted to talk more but didn't want to worry the younger cousins. My older cousin Maddie clearly didn't care about anything that was going on. She just wanted to sleep. We convinced her to take my 3 young cousins into the basement so they could all get some sleep. But not me. I was invested. Uncle Matt and I are close. We see each other all the time. How could I not have a shred of evidence that he even existed? As my cousins shuffled downstairs, all the adults huddled around a big whiteboard Aunt Margot slapped on the kitchen island. They started to write down everything they could remember, what he looked like, the last time they saw him, memories of him. None of it was coherent. It seemed he was a completely different person in all our memories, even in memories where multiple people were around. One of the only things we could all agree on was that the Jensens always thought he was on the Miller side of the family, and the Millers always thought he was on the Jensen side. My mom recalled a story of Matt and my dad going to a lake to fish, but the hook got stuck on Matt's hat and went flying. My dad told us he remembered my mom telling him the same exact story many times. Everyone had memories of stories where he was on the other side of the family. Soon, everyone was on the phone with a new family member, trying to tell them the situation and asking what they thought about everything. My aunts and uncles were talking to relatives on the phone. I didn't know I had relatives who probably only met Matt a couple of times, at best. All I heard was one dead end at a time. No one knew where he came from or where he went. So, the big question was, who is Matt? Was he just some random guy who weaseled his way into the family, telling one side of the family one thing and the other side another? Or was it something so much worse? As the sun came up that Saturday morning, we were all still scratching our heads. The deeper we got into who Matt was, the more freaked out everyone got. I was honestly surprised they let me stay with them all night long. The more digging everyone did, the farther away we felt. The more rabbit holes we went down, the less real he seemed. We couldn't find any evidence that he ever existed. Some of us searched all over the internet for Matt Jensen or Matt Miller, and a few of us searched for other last names in the family. Of course, it was kind of hard to know who we were looking for, given we didn't know what he really looked like. After hours of discussion, we compiled a list of attributes that never wavered about Uncle Matt. He was a man. He never had a mustache. He was tall. He was bad at math, and he loved Jim Carrey movies. That might seem like a random grouping of facts, but that's because it was. We couldn't even remember where his house was. Some of us completely forgot, and others remembered different houses. It didn't matter. We weren't going to start knocking on doors to find a man we were concerned never existed. We started to believe that as soon as we began to question who he was, he just simply started to fade away into nothingness, like it was some kind of self-destructive act on his own consciousness. It was around 9 a.m. that morning when people started to fall asleep on couches. The night before started with everyone being determined and saying the night wouldn't end until we found Uncle Matt, but here we all were, exhausted and with little to no answers. It felt like accepting defeat by napping on the couch, but we couldn't do much else. At 11 a.m., we all woke up to the sound of my cousins playing in the next room over. We all sat up and rubbed our eyes. You could practically see the gears turning in everyone's heads as they woke up from their stupors. I could tell when they realized their memories actually happened, and it wasn't just a weird fever dream. My Aunt Margot stumbled to the kitchen while yawning and started to dig in the pantry for something substantial the kids could all eat. It was clear they had already raided the cookie stash. As the adults had a quiet conversation, we heard something come from my cousin Cass that made us freeze. Yeah, remember last night when Uncle Matt gave us all those cookies? It was so much fun. My small cousin said with a hop and a skip. Wait, Cass, get over here and say that again, my Uncle Andrew yelled in an attempt to sound intimidating but came out with a voice crack. Cass walked over to us, looking like a confused puppy who just got yelled at. What did I do wrong, Uncle Andrew? I thought if Uncle Matt offered us cookies, I could have them. Cass, you are not in trouble. This is very important. Are you telling me Uncle Matt was with you guys last night? Uncle Andrew tried to say in a gentle tone to not scare Cass. I mean, not the whole night, but he brought us all cookies and put a movie on for us. Then he said he wanted to go hang out with you guys upstairs, Cass told us in a quiet voice. Everyone started to frantically look around the room, looking for any evidence of him being there last night. We quickly asked the rest of the cousins if they saw Matt, and some kids did, and some didn't. I noticed something when I started to count the objects in the room. There were 10 adults and me upstairs last night. So, there should have been 11 people in total, but I saw 12 plates out with the leftover crumbs from our late night pizza, 12 spots laid out for sleeping in the living room, and 12 mugs or cups of coffee. He was here last night. As I mentioned what I found, my dad said he remembered seeing him last night. He said Matt brought him some water. Uncle Paul said he saw him go to the bathroom but couldn't remember him coming out. They mentioned how it felt like it never actually happened, but he managed to place the memory in them after the fact. How else would they see Uncle Matt right in front of them and not realize what was happening? I had a strange feeling that started to bubble up. I felt uneasy and restless. Wait, something is off here, I said loudly to the room. Everyone line up on the wall. I want to try something. For a second, they all looked at me confused. They normally wouldn't let me boss them around like that, but they were desperate and tired. All the adults lined up against the wall. As I walked by them, I counted out loud. Something strange happened. I counted 12 people, including me. None of the kids were lined up. I wasn't counting myself twice. There was an extra person. Uncle Matt wasn't just here last night. He was with us in the room at that moment. Other members of the family even tried to count. We did it over and over again, even adding one of the kids to the mix, but every single time there was one extra person, but we still couldn't see him. How was he hiding in plain sight? Everyone ended up leaving my Aunt Margot's house that afternoon. We were all still extremely creeped out about the whole thing, but what could we do about it? Not much. It's not like Uncle Matt ever did anything violent. Mostly normal behavior, except for a few memories of him that were kind of weird. One of us remembered seeing him in the kitchen, stacking and unstacking bowls for hours. Another person remembered him once packing for a vacation, but his suitcase only had trash bags in it. And I have a memory of us sitting in front of a fireplace with him, reading the instruction manual to a blender for a bedtime story. At least those were the kind of memories we had in the beginning. As the weeks went on, we started to remember things that got more and more concerning. He showed up at our houses in the middle of the night, or bought us all hammers for Christmas. He once bought hundreds of dollars worth of knives and put them in my dad's car. Once we developed disturbing memories of him, we tried to tell the police. Of course, they couldn't find any evidence of his existence, so they couldn't help us. It didn't help our case that we couldn't even give them a last name. How on earth were they supposed to find a guy based on his name being Matt and no physical features? So, who is Uncle Matt? I can say with 100% certainty, I have no clue. Is he a man? Is he an entity? Is he a figment of our imaginations? Or is he nothing at all? I don't know. And that's the worst part of all. He seems to always be around at family dinners. Most of the time I count the number of people, I end up with an extra person. He feels like a virus, always implanting a memory of himself being around, but in the moment, I never see him. It seems to be a family joke at this point, always leaving out an extra plate for him or something. In my opinion, no one is taking this situation seriously. I know he hasn't hurt anyone, but why should we wait for something to happen? I swear I can feel it when he shows up. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My family has given up on trying to figure out who or what Uncle Matt is. But I haven't. It feels like they have all just forgotten the disturbing memories of him. I swear the deeper I dig to find him, the worse the memories get. Like he is rotting and festering in my memories, right before my eyes. I'm starting to think it's his attempt to stop me from looking for him. The fact that he is punishing me for looking for him makes my concern grow more and more. Why is he suddenly running now that I am onto him? Why is he so afraid of me finding him? And what will happen once I do find him? I will find you, Uncle Matt. I will find out what you are. Every night, my girlfriend wakes me up to tell the exact same joke. Before I start, I feel like I should make something very clear. I absolutely love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now, but we've known each other our whole lives. In fact, we were childhood friends, and I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So, I don't know what took me so long to ask her out, but I'm really glad I did. We have the same taste in music, movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes and know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle, and loving girl I've ever met. We'd even been talking about our plans for marriage and how we would like to have kids of our own. That's why it hurts so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to preface that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me and some very distant aunts that she never met and doesn't even know their names. I was born into a big family with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins who were always visiting and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive person who died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person who took care of the family by herself for many years. She was almost like a second mother to me. So when she passed away last year, it hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stayed strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface, so you've got to be a lot more perceptive to understand what she truly feels. I used to pride myself on being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange and, frankly, terrifying. We were sleeping in bed, and I was dreaming. I don't really remember what it was about, but for some reason, I'm sure of it until I heard her voice very close to my ear. Knock, 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 knock. She was caressing my hair gently while sitting in bed and looking down at me. I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, baby? She kept looking at me, fixated, and repeated. Knock, 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 knock. I glanced at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. What is it, Ellen? She paused. Please answer the joke, dear. Knock, 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 knock. Fine. I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up, and she answered, Not me. So don't answer the door. I kept looking at her, dumbfounded. What was that supposed to mean? Is that it? Is that the joke? Yes, she said, lying on the couch and covering herself with a blanket. Thank you for answering. Weirdo. I answered, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. The next morning, things went as usual. I only remembered the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, and wasn't even sure if it had truly happened or if it was just a weird dream. So, we had our breakfast together, and she was acting normal, reading something aloud from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention. So, I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then her eyes fixated on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face briefly. And I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything important and stopped paying attention when I asked more inquisitively. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and just brushed off the weird event, thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice. Knock, knock. A pause. Knock. What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing? Knock, knock, knock. She repeated. This time, she wasn't even touching me. Just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile. But her eyes seemed larger, and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock. Once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on. What is it? I got work in a few hours. Can't have the luxury of waking up in the middle of the night to answer knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock, knock. This is getting creepy, you know? I'm not sure if this is some gag you've been doing, but I don't like it. Answer it. Knock, Knock. Knock. I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course, but she was also my Ellen. So, it didn't bother me as much as it should. Fine. Who the hell is there? I answered in a playful tone. Not me. So don't answer the door. For some reason, I felt a chill down my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange, monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile and the fact that I had no idea what she meant by that. What does that mean? I asked. I really don't get it. She just smiled and went back to sleep. I felt a throb in my heart, but did the same. Next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was very evasive with my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost as if she couldn't talk about it, which was very strange, considering we talked about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and I wasn't liking her little gag every night. She just nodded. I decided not to press further, as I didn't want to hurt her feelings and had work to attend to. When I got back home, we had dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed. Knock, knock. I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again and kept thinking about it the whole time. I glanced at the clock, 3:27 a.m. Knock, knock. I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet. Knock, knock. She continued. She didn't stop. I regulated my breathing, but she kept going. Knock, knock. I'm not answering your joke, Ellen. Stop it. Knock, knock. I ignored her, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves, and frankly, I felt scared. Why was Ellen doing this? Why every night, at the same exact time, down to the minute? Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answered her? Knock, knock. I got up suddenly. God damn it, Ellen. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was as if the strength was drained from me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking. Just staring right at me, fixated like an animal. Her mouth was moving slowly, and she didn't stop. Knock, knock. I didn't know how to react, or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place. 1,000-yard stare. Knock, knock. Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that nightmare. Not me. So don't answer the door, she said weakly. Ellen slowly closed her eyes and lay down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down on the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and absorbing the quiet of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast, and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a knock-knock joke. But it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as sleepwalking. But it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired and decided that early in the morning I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. Something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed on the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. She even asked me why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't speak to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend, told him everything that was happening in as much detail as I'm describing now. He didn't seem as worried as I figured, but we agreed on making an appointment for next week. Now I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she seemed reluctant but agreed to go with me. So we made up. This was Ellen, after all. The girl I had known since I was 6 years old. The woman I loved and that had taken care of me for years. And as much as that strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't doing anything particularly frightening or even dangerous. So for a brief while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even prepared my favorite meal. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom even though I was still a bit reluctant. Knock. I couldn't believe it. She promised me she wouldn't. Knock. I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Always. Knock. I was lying on my stomach and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at that point. Sad that she had broken her word. Knock. Who's there? I answered, determined to just go back to sleep. Not me. So don't answer the door. I stayed quiet and closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep. Probably because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act the same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly, she didn't say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Didn't receive any messages either. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I had ever had in my life. And she barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom and sleep on the couch. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but I held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs only to tell me the same knock-knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shook off that uneasy feeling, and tried to sleep. I had a deep sleep, without dreams. Felt like I was lost in darkness. Then I heard breathing. I opened my eyes to see Ellen, standing above me, looking at me with big, fixated eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression. Watching me sleep. I almost screamed in terror. I jumped off the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled through the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, what are you doing? I asked, desperate. But she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything. Just stared at me, as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then I heard a knock on the front door. Instinctively, I looked in that direction. It was followed by another knock. And another. Someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen, and she was still staring at me. Slowly, I got closer to the door, and she didn't move. The pounding continued. Who's there? I screamed. It stopped. And then I heard a voice. John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please open the door. I froze in place. The voice kept calling me. but I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door. But it couldn't be. I beg you, John. Open the door, it's serious. She's not me, I swear. She's not me. Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch. She was looking at me, the same fixated eyes and a terrible, wide grin across her face. The pounding continued. John, open the door. Please, you have to trust me. I stayed still, not knowing what to do. And I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates it's 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling uncontrollably, and I don't know what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I don't know if I opened the door. I tried to look for my phone to see if I could call the police or at least someone I know. But I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now to get advice. Because I can't go downstairs. The corridor is dark, very dark, almost as if the shadows were leaning into the room. And I can hear a faint, scratching sound coming from below. What should I do? A stranger paid my cabin a midnight visit. She said we're being watched. A few weeks ago, I rented a cabin near Pitkin County, Colorado, for a weekend getaway with my wife and daughter. For their privacy, I'll refer to my wife as Elena and my daughter, who's between 4 and 8 years old, as Sophia. It was dusk by the time we arrived at the cabin, far later than Elena and I had planned. The afternoon's anticipation was gone, the promise of a relaxing vacation already sullied, and my back sore from changing the tire, which had been eviscerated by the forest road. The mood was thoroughly ruined. Maybe that should have been an indication of how the rest of the trip would go. The cabin itself was beautiful and rustic. Nestled among the towering pines, the two-story building blended into the surrounding woodlands with its dark-stained wooden siding and stone chimney. Large windows glistened with the last light of day, and the wraparound porch boasted a hanging patio swing, much to Sophia's delight. She ran straight for it and started swinging as Elena and I carried the bags inside. When I unlocked the door and turned on the lights, I was surprised by the decor. In stark contrast to the classy, almost minimalist exterior of the cabin, the interior was remarkably cluttered. Every square surface, countertops, bookshelves, tables, was covered in little trinkets. Tchotchkes, as my mother would have called them. There were coasters, candles, vintage oil lamps, compasses, and a bunch of wooden animal carvings, each about a foot tall. The interior wasn't dirty by any means, just more crowded than expected. I found it charming in a weird way, though Elena was less fond. I remember her taking a long look at the place and saying, "Interesting," which is her code for, "I don't like what I'm seeing, but I also don't want to make a big deal about it." It was past Sophia's bedtime, so after coaxing her off the porch swing, I helped her get set up for the night. There were 2 bedrooms on the second floor, a master suite with an attached bathroom and a smaller bedroom that was clearly set up as a kid's room for visitors. The cabin was specifically advertised as family-friendly and good for parents with younger children, so it was no surprise that the smaller bedroom was full of colorful toys and plushies. There was a fireplace across from the bed, its mantel showcasing a full set of those wooden animal carvings, 1 moose, 1 bear, 1 trout, and so on. There was also one particularly large teddy bear sitting on the bed, partially buried under the covers like it was getting ready for bed. Sophia instantly fell in love, and I thought it was sweet that the cabin's owner had gone the extra mile to make the place welcoming. I didn't love the idea of her cuddling it to sleep, though, since it likely hadn't been washed between visits, so I propped it up on a chair next to the bed before tucking Sophia in for the night. Tired from our travels, Elena and I went to sleep not too long afterward. Saturday was our designated lake day. After making breakfast and waking up Sophia, who had to be convinced not to take her new best friend, Mr. Bear, out on the water with us, we grabbed the kayaks off our roof rack and headed down to the shore. We were a short walk from the lake, and I was absolutely blown away by the natural splendor. Our cabin was semi-isolated, remote enough to give my family peace and privacy, but close enough to civilization that we could easily access help in case of an emergency. We were a 5-minute drive into town and a 5-minute walk to the nearest neighboring cabin, which we passed on the way to the lake. It was a gorgeous building, far more intricate and seemingly much older than the one we were renting. There was an older woman sitting on the porch as we passed it by, and although I couldn't wave since both hands were full with the kayaks, I gave her a nod and a friendly smile. She stared at me in response, her expression completely blank. She was looking directly at me, but almost looked like she was in a trance or something. What was that all about? I quietly asked Elena once we were out of earshot. Not sure, my wife answered. She looks pretty settled in there. Maybe that's her home, and she doesn't appreciate her neighbor running an Airbnb. That seemed a logical explanation. I stole a quick glance over my shoulder before the house completely disappeared behind us and saw that the woman was now walking down the steps of her front porch, her gaze still fixed on us. Elena and I exchanged worried looks and picked up the pace a little, Sophia running along ahead of us, joyful and oblivious. Once we reached the shore, we hopped into the kayaks and pushed off into the water. We weren't exactly running away from the woman. It was more so that we wanted to avoid a confrontation if we could. As we started paddling out into the lake, the woman appeared at the tree line but never came any closer. I gave her a wave, and again, she gave me no response but a glower. It occurred to me that she might have been trying to warn us about the lake, maybe about a current or algal bloom, but I've researched the area extensively to make sure it was safe, and her demeanor wasn't quite urgent or benevolent enough for that to be the case. The rest of the day was thankfully devoid of any more strange encounters. After a calm day of swimming and hiking, we returned to the cabin in the evening for dinner and esmores. Sophia brought Mr. Bear outside to help with the esmores, to mine and Elena's amusement. We had no idea how we would convince her to leave the stuffed animal behind when we left on Monday night. After we put Sophia to sleep at 8 p.m., Elena and I watched a movie, had a drink, and then went to sleep at 10:30 or so. At midnight, according to my phone clock, I heard what sounded like a knock. I sat up in bed, checked the time, and listened for a minute. A few seconds passed, and then there came 3 knocks in quick succession. I gently shook Elena awake, waiting to hear the sound again, and after a moment, I did. There was someone at the front door of the cabin in the middle of the night. Concerned, I got out of bed and tried to look out the bedroom window. I could only see a sliver of the front porch, and though I couldn't see an actual person, I could see the shadow of one thanks to the porch lights. Needless to say, I wasn't thrilled to have a stranger pay our isolated cabin a midnight visit. I told Elena to stay upstairs and made my way to the first floor, stopping by the living room to pull back the curtains ever so slightly and peer through the window. Still, given the shape of the house and the placement of the windows, it was impossible to see anything but a shadow. The person must have been standing an inch away from the front door. I scanned the front yard and the distant tree line, but didn't see anyone else, so a decoy/ambush situation seemed unlikely. Still, I grabbed my handgun just in case. Just my luck, the old front door of the house didn't have a peephole, so I got up close to the door and tried talking to the person on the other end. "Can I help you?" I said. Instead of answering, the person knocked again, this time more urgently. No way in hell was I opening that door now. "Look, friend, if you need help, you better speak up. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to ask you to get off my damn porch before I call the police." The knocking stopped, and after a moment, there was a woman's voice on the other side of the door. Her tone was nervous, and her voice was soft. She said a single sentence. "He's watching your daughter through the bear." Of all the things I expected to hear from our unwelcome visitor, that was not one of them. I readied my gun and cracked the door open. When I looked out into the night, I saw the elderly woman from earlier quickly shambling away from my door. Her back was turned towards me, and she looked like she was trying to get away from my porch as quickly as she could. I called after her, asking her what she was talking about, but she didn't look back. She just kept going until the night swallowed her up completely. I was pretty disturbed at this point, so I shut and locked the door and made my way back upstairs. Elena was waiting for me at the top of the stairs, and I quietly explained to her what was going on. Horrified, she went into Sophia's room and gently took the teddy bear out of our sleeping daughter's arms. We went downstairs and laid the bear out on the kitchen counter. I grabbed a pair of kitchen shears and dissected the thing, making an incision in its fluffy body and pulling out its cotton innards. It wasn't that I believed the old woman, just that as a parent, anything related to my kids' safety, even something that sounds outlandish, is something I take seriously. Even though the woman was likely suffering from some kind of cognitive impairment, I still wanted to investigate. I pulled all the stuffing out of Mr. Bear and found nothing, though Elena pointed out that the bear had two very large glass eyes which could potentially be concealing a small camera. I was unable to find a hammer, but I did find a wrench under the kitchen sink. I wrapped the eyes in a kitchen towel and smashed them to bits, but when I sorted through the fragments, I didn't see anything that looked like a recording device. I was relieved, but I was also equal parts creeped out and angry. Maybe, like Elena had mentioned earlier, she was annoyed with the constant visitors to her neighboring cabin and was trying to scare us off. She might also have had some mental health issues or hallucinations. In either case, though, how did she know about the teddy bear? Maybe she had visited the house before, or maybe it was just a lucky guess. Before returning to bed, I took a turn around both floors of the cabin, looking and failing to find anything out of the ordinary. Elena was also pretty freaked out, and she got up several times in the night to visit Sophia's room down the hall and make sure all was well. Needless to say, neither of us got much sleep that night. Sunday morning was all doom and gloom, which ended up being a perfect reflection of my daughter's attitude when she woke up and realized Mr. Bear was gone. Obviously, we didn't tell her what had happened, but Elena and I did our best to distract her with flapjacks and promises of a fun day of adventuring. Unfortunately, the hike we had planned was foiled by a downpour that, of course, the forecast hadn't predicted, and so we decided to salvage the day by exploring the small town nearby. It wouldn't be the escape into nature we hoped for, but there were several family-owned restaurants and shops in the area, as well as a small library. The morning was all right. I enjoyed exploring the little town with my family, although there wasn't much to do. We had an early lunch at around 11 or so, but when we sat down, my wife started rifling through her backpack with a look of dismay. When I asked her what was wrong, she said that she didn't see Sophia's EpiPen, which we always like to have at the ready when we eat out. I realized immediately that I'd forgotten to put it back in Elena's backpack yesterday when I was reorganizing our stuff. I felt like such an idiot, and Elena, already grouchy from a sleepless night, really chewed me out for it. To make amends, I told her to wait with Sophia at the restaurant while I hurried back to the cabin for the EpiPen. She was displeased, but it felt like a better option than all of us braving the rain to return to the cabin. The drive back was an absolute nightmare. Sure, it was a short commute, but the dirt roads leading up to the cabin had turned to sludge in the heavy rain. I was in a foul mood when I entered the cabin. I shut the front door with a slam and made my way to the stairs. The house was dark thanks to the storm outside, dark enough that I almost missed the muddy shoe prints leading up the hardwood steps. When I saw them and realized what they were, I stopped in my tracks. I didn't have to wonder what they meant. Someone had been in the cabin since my family left, and judging by the fact that there was only one set of prints, they likely were still in the house with me at that very moment. I stood on the half landing, looking up at the second half of the staircase. The upper floor was eerily dark, so much so that someone could have been standing right at the edge of the staircase, and I wouldn't have been able to see them. I carefully walked backwards down the stairs, keeping my eyes peeled in case any shape suddenly emerged from the darkness, and once I made it down the stairs, I turned around and ran outside. I sat in my car and called the police to report a break-in. After calling Elena to explain the situation, I sat in my car and watched the house until the police arrived, which took almost an unreasonable amount of time. I never saw any movement from inside the house, nor did I see anyone leave, though I didn't have a great visual on the back door. It's possible that the intruder could have slipped through the back and run straight for the woods, in which case the cabin would have obscured them. The police were shockingly curt and dismissive about the whole thing. One of the officers who arrived on scene asked me for proof of a break-in, as if I would have had time to snap a picture of the intruder in my house or something. They did a sweep of the cabin and found no one inside, but even so, I didn't want my wife and daughter to set foot in that building again. I texted Elena, telling her I was going to pack up our stuff and that we should leave a night early, and she agreed. The cops stayed with me as I packed to give me some peace of mind, which I appreciated. Aside from the shoe prints, there weren't any obvious signs of a break-in, and strangely, nothing of value had been stolen, even though I've left my laptop laying out in plain sight. Thankfully, we packed light, so it didn't take me long to grab all of our stuff from the master bedroom and the bathrooms. My last stop was Sophia's room, where I was quickly able to locate and pack all of her things. Nothing of Sophia's had been stolen or tampered with, but there was something missing from the fireplace mantel. Right in the center, there was a circular impression in the fine layer of dust, indicating that a certain figurine had recently been separated from its wooden brethren. Someone had taken the bear. The cage. The cage has been passed down since before written record. It moves from mother to daughter in a silent ceremony. The bars of the cage still glisten with what gold remains untarnished. The rest has fallen victim to that serial murderer known as age. The lean door still opens and closes, dust from ancient beings loosening from its hinges. Dust, after all, is just the cells of dead skin. And the cage has seen many deaths. Right now, the cage is waiting for Amelia. Amelia has barely grasped the concept of life outside herself. Her world is full of familiar rooms and hallways. She is occupied by the faces of her family and the 3 husk dolls she plays with. Their names are Squeak, Bite, and Dry. A sheltered life is all she has ever known. It is better this way. It makes it easier. Amelia has left her room. She takes Squeak with her. Bite and Dry gaze enviously out of their vacant, lifeless eyes. The hallway is softly lit by candlelight. It flickers against the white satin of Amelia's gown. This is the most extravagant dress she will ever wear. It falls plainly, like a sack, against her body. I am awake and sitting in the pitch darkness of the living room. This night has been long in the making. I sit the way my mother must have sat, alone and aloof, awaiting the presence of her daughter. I both dread and welcome this night. I live with the contradiction, as so many women have before me. Amelia enters. She stands in the blackness. Are you ready? My voice does not quiver. I will do as the prophet wishes. She clutches Squeak close to her chest. And if the prophet wishes for you to die, I will do as the prophet wishes. Amelia knows these words by heart. I rise from my position and light a lantern beside me. The room erupts in orange light. It bathes Amelia in a harsh glow. Her plain gown seems almost alive as it reflects the licking fire. She has turned Squeak's head, so it is looking at her face. I feel a stab of pity. The cage sits on the floor of the room. It is only 3 feet high and half that wide. It might be confused for a dog kennel if it weren't for the ornate gold bars. In the many generations before me, this cage must have been a marvel. It must have glittered and gleamed. But now the pageantry has been dulled. The years have carved their initials onto the beauty that once was. Even still, it is a sight to behold. Especially for Amelia. The lantern light has beckoned my husband and the young man he has with him. They enter the room with greedy smiles. My husband has waited so long for this ceremony. He does not try to hide his excitement. The boy is less sure. He is about 20 or so, completely clean-shaven, and wears a wide-brimmed hat that does little to hide his nervousness. I light more candles, so the room feels warm. Amelia still holds that husk doll as though it might change what is about to happen. She has turned Squeak's face, so it now stares at me. When I speak, my voice is clear and unwavering. I have asked the girl if she is ready to do the prophet's bidding. She has agreed. The boy shifts uncomfortably. My husband places a heavy hand on his shoulder. I speak again. Now I ask the boy, "Are you ready?" He clears his throat. "Yes." "You wish to wed this girl?" "Yes." His face becomes a bit hungrier now. He can see Amelia's body beneath her gown. He has heard couples making love. The boy can still hear the cries of ecstasy. He wants to add his voice to those of the lovers. I brush my hand along the cage. This cage represents the bonds of marriage. They are unbreakable and can withstand even the thickest storm. I open the cage door. It makes a low rumble as the bars free themselves. The boy starts to shake with anticipation. How long must she stay in there? He is new to our village. He comes from Amish country to the north. We receive many former Amish men looking for a place similar to their homes. We welcome them. They make perfect husbands. The virgin shall remain in the cage until the time of consummation. I beckon to Amelia. She steps forward. Do you wish to please the prophet? I will do as the prophet wishes. She has turned Squeak's face, so it now glares at the cage. And you? I turn to the boy, who is pushed forward by my husband. Do you wish to please? Yes, he says breathlessly. Yes. I put my arms around them both, feeling their individual heartbeats. Then let the prophets will be done. Carefully, I release my grip on Amelia and use both hands to shove the boy into the cage. Before he can protest, I have closed the door and locked it. This is not my first time. The cage is just small enough where the boy cannot stand, but he also cannot sit. Instead, he crouches awkwardly, pressed against the bars. He is angry. What is going on? The cage represents marriage, I say smoothly. The virgin will be released upon consummation. I thought SHE was going in here. I am the man, the husband. You are the breeding sow, I respond. My husband falls to his knees, tears in his eyes. Is this the one? He asks. Am I free to go now? I regard my husband carefully. He has been a good servant all these years. He has given me Amelia. He has brought her 3 previous suitors. Once she has selected a husband for herself, he will be a free man again. Perhaps he will find his way to the place of his birth. But until Amelia has picked a man, he is bound to me. I remember when it was him locked in the cage. It took me 2 years to decide that he would be my husband. 2 years in the cage made putty of his legs and mind. My own mother would feed him scraps from the table. She would poke him with sticks from the fire, laughing at his agony. I remember my father's impatience. The same impatience I see in my husband now. The boy is crying and pleading with me, but I only have eyes for my daughter. Her 3 previous suitors were not to her liking. As is tradition, we made offerings out of their flesh. They were turned into 3 husk dolls for Amelia to play with. Her favorite, Squeak, was starved to death inside the tiny prison. At the end, he could only make small whines to protest his death. But, like the others, he died behind the faded golden bars. Amelia studies the boy. He looks strong, she says casually. He has a pretty face. Almost like a woman's. Could you stand looking at that face for many years to come? I smile at her. She reminds me so much of myself. I too was picky when it came to my husband. In my bedroom sit 9 husk dolls similar to the one in her arms. I think so, but I'm not sure. She looks to me. Might I wait and decide? You can wait as long as you need. I stroke her hair lovingly. If he dies before you decide, then we know it was not meant to be. My husband is softly crying, realizing that his prison sentence will not be lifted on this night. The boy is pounding at the bars and screaming. I blow out the candles and leave the men to their sorrow. I walk Amelia back to her bedroom. She sets Squeak on the shelf next to the others. Then she climbs into bed. I kiss her gently on the forehead. Is the prophet pleased with me? She asks quietly. Very pleased, I respond. She sighs happily and closes her eyes. I tuck her in and leave her. I can still hear the howls from the boy and the soft whimpers of my husband. But my mind is set in the future when I am gone and my daughter will lead this congregation. I have no doubt she will make an excellent prophet, just as my mother was. Just as I am. Someone is hiding in my house. I think they're trying to scare me to death. It all started with a cup of water. Every morning, I wake up, climb out of bed, march downstairs, fill a tall glass with tap water, and drink it. But this time, the water went down the wrong way. I started coughing, sputtering, almost choking. I set the glass down on the countertop, turned away, and thumped my chest until the coughing stopped. But when I turned back, the cup of water was gone. I froze, motionless. Only my eyes moved, darting back and forth around the kitchen. The air shifted, a subtle drift, as though something moved through with incredible speed. I stepped back from the countertop, and my heel bumped into something. I spun around. My heel had bumped into the glass of water. It tumbled over with a dull, clattering thud. Empty. Wary, I squatted down, picked it up, and studied it, turned it over in my hand like it was some strange, alien artifact. What just happened? I called my sister to tell her what happened. She laughed. There must be a reasonable explanation, she said. Perhaps Dash from The Incredibles did it? Coincidence? I think not, she teased. I laughed along. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for it. Maybe I dropped the glass in my coughing fit and it somehow landed upright. Crazier things have happened. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Little happenings like this became commonplace. Each event was slightly less explainable than the last, a building experience of uncanny madness. But still, I shrugged it off, tried to think of reasonable explanations, tried to hand-wave it all away. But then, the Cup Trail incident occurred. There was no reasonable explanation for the Cup Trail incident. I snapped awake. 2:50 a.m. on Tuesday. Bright light blinding into my dilated eyes. The lights were on. Somehow, the lights were on. A power surge, perhaps? I climbed out of bed, marched across the room, and froze. I froze because my bedroom door was open. But the door being open didn't bother me too much. What bothered me was the glass of half-empty water sitting on the floor in the middle of the upstairs hallway. That bothered me for several reasons, chief among them being, I didn't put it there. I crept out into the hallway. The floor was uncharacteristically creaky tonight. I squatted down, lifted the glass of water, and fingerprints. Fingerprints were fogged on the glass, dozens and dozens of fingerprints. I recoiled, dropping the glass. It thumped onto the carpet and spilled over, an expanding puddle of water absorbing into the fabric. I glanced back over my shoulder. A looming sense of unease climbed through my body. I pushed back to standing in. Another glass of water. Half empty. Sitting at the top of the stairs. I walked forward. I looked down the stairs. Another one. Sitting halfway down the steps. A trail of half-empty cups. Should I just call the police? I reached for my phone instinctively, but it wasn't there. I always kept my phone in my pocket, even while I slept, don't ask. But now it was gone. It was gone, and somebody was hiding in my house. I looked back over my shoulder, down the hallway, toward my bedroom. Did it fall out of my pocket? Was it in my bed? Did I leave it on my bedside table? I was about to go look when, downstairs, something buzzed against the hardwood floor. A quick 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 pattern. The distinct pattern I made for notifications. Somehow, my phone was downstairs. I turned back, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. My phone lay on the kitchen floor, buzzing around in lazy circles. I stepped over, picked it up, and flicked on the screen. Time to call the police. But I froze again. My eyes caught a push notification at the top of the screen, new photos saved to cloud. I raised an eyebrow, tapped into it, and my breath sucked out of my lungs like a vacuum. It was a photo of me, fast asleep. Taken at 2:57 a.m. 1 minute before I woke up. A sickening swell of dread spiraled through me as everything piled up, the cups of water, the lights turning on, the phone being downstairs, and now, finally, the photo of me. The photo that somebody else had taken as I slept. I dialed 911. 911, where are you located? A calming, almost serene voice answered. I gave them my address. What's your emergency? She replied. There's somebody in my house. Are you in a room? What? Please get to a safe room and lock the door. I bolted to the nearest washroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Maybe I should have just run outside, but what if they were waiting for me? Okay, sir, are you safe? Said the voice on the other end. I. A door slammed shut. Somewhere upstairs. He's upstairs. I said. Help is on the way. Focus on breathing. Breathe in. I breathed in. Breathe out. I breathed out. Breathe in. Upstairs, another door swung open and slammed shut. The intruder was searching now, checking each and every room in order. Sir? Are you there? Yes. I whispered. The slamming doors were getting closer. One room at a time, getting closer. The final door upstairs slammed shut, and suddenly, a door downstairs swung open and slammed shut. Were there multiple intruders? Either there were multiple intruders, or this person was impossibly fast. Sir? He's. Sir, are you still in the bathroom? The bathroom? How did they know I was hiding in the bathroom? I never told them I was hiding in the bathroom. Sir, are you there? The voice said again, but this time, I could hear it on the other side of the door too. I could hear the 911 operator's voice inside my house. The intruder was talking to me on the phone. The intruder was somehow pretending to be a 911 operator. They were talking to me. The bathroom doorknob jostled. "Sir, open the door, please," she said. Dropping the phone, I wrapped my grip around the handle, pulling back with all my strength. "Sir, please open the door." I didn't budge. "Sir, open the door. Open the door, open the door," she kept repeating. Like a broken record. Like a pre-made recording. All the while pulling back at the doorknob, trying to get in. The lights started turning on and off. On and off. A rapid cycle between light and dark, faster and faster. "Sir, we can't help you if you don't open the door," she said, almost sounding on the verge of laughter now. "Sir? Are you there? Sir?" Suddenly, outside, around the corner, the front door burst open. "Police," a baritone voice boomed. Silence. "Police?" I remained quiet. I didn't trust it. Whatever I was dealing with didn't seem to play by the rules of reality. I wasn't going to fall for it. I remained silent. Hands gripped around the doorknob, I remained motionless. "Hello," said the deep voice, then the crackle of radio static. I'm getting no response. Requesting backup. I hid in the bathroom for about an hour until they found me. The actual police found me. I was a nervous wreck, understandably so, ranting and raving. Telling them about the woman on the phone, telling them about the cups of water on the floor. They sent me in for a psych eval, and I was discharged a few days later. Of course, no one believed me. Even when I showed them the photo of me sleeping, no one believed me. There must be a reasonable explanation, they always said. Perhaps you had a temporary psychotic breakdown, my sister theorized. I moved out the next month. No way I was sticking around after that. In hindsight, I should have moved out earlier. Now I'm living upstate in a much smaller house. Fewer places for would-be intruders to hide. I have cameras set up everywhere, so this time, if anyone messes with me, I'll have the receipts. It's all connected to my phone too, so I can even check the cameras while at work. I might be a coward, but I'm not stupid. So, quite a few uneventful months had gone by since the Cup Trail incident. In fact, nothing else had even happened until tonight. I was even starting to wonder if perhaps my sister was right. Perhaps I had a momentary lapse in sanity. But now I'm lying on my bed, writing this on my phone. I can't move. I'm paralyzed with fear, and writing this is the only thing that even remotely calms me down. I'm paralyzed with fear because earlier, about 1 hour and 23 minutes ago, to be exact, I got home from work late. I got home from work late and crawled right into bed. That was my first mistake. I broke my ritual, my daily ritual of checking all the cameras before entering the house, checking to see if any motion was recorded during the day. But I was tired, and it was late after work, and I just wanted to sleep. I'll check the cameras in bed, I thought. I'll just check the cameras in bed. And of course, today, of all days, is the day something happened. What happened, you ask? Perhaps some of you already guessed. But I'll let you know regardless. 9 hours and 23 minutes ago, the bedroom camera recorded motion. I watched the footage on my phone just 20 minutes ago. It was footage of me mulling about the house, getting ready for work, and then leaving. I breathed relief. Of course, it was just me. You fool, you should have known. It was you. You threw off your schedule, and you were late, and the cameras detected you. But then, 30 seconds after I had left. Motion detected, bedroom camera. The footage appeared. My empty bedroom. Dark. I squinted. Nothing. Suddenly, in the footage, the lights flicked on. Still nothing. They flicked on and off, and then I saw something that filled me with a fear far beyond anything I ever felt. A fear far beyond anything I even knew was possible. When the lights flicked back on, a person appeared. A person standing in the middle of my room with pin-straight posture, hands over their face like someone playing peekaboo. The footage fast-forwarded on its own now. Shadows drifted across the wall as the sun outside moved downward. But the person just stood there motionless. Motionless as the world sped by. Hands covering their face. The footage snapped back to real time. 30 seconds before I arrived home. The person slightly perked up, hearing my arrival. Then, hands still covering their face, they dropped to their knees. In one smooth, almost robotic motion, they fell to their side and rolled under the bed. They rolled under the bed. They rolled under the bed that I was currently lying on. The bed which I am laying on right now, manically typing on my phone in the dark. Just beat them up, LOL. I can almost hear the very badass readers among you writing in the comments below. Call 911? I hear the good faith warriors among you thinking. But seriously? Call 911? After what happened last time? Call 911? Either way, I figure this is the last thing I'll ever post, so I hope you got some enjoyment out of reading about my imminent demise. If you see two kids on Highway 101, don't stop. The 101 is just a trickle by the time it winds north of Forks. Much of it does not have cell coverage, and in the middle of the night, the darkness is so pervasive that it only steps back a little from the high beams. It seems darkest near milepost 199. Taillight reflectors shine through the rolling 2 a.m. fog. A car was there, an old dusty 1980s station wagon driven through the wider part of hell. The windows were all dusted over despite a heavy downpour 10 minutes ago. It appeared it had been in a crash that forced the driver's door open along with the hood. Standing by the car were two kids, no more than 10, the son in a yellow Alchematic t-shirt and the girl in a pink pastel shirt and jean overalls. The girl, maybe a bit older, waved to get my attention. I leaned over and rolled down the window just a crack. I learned the hard way to never trust strangers. Our car's broken, mister, the girl said as her brother began to cry. Our parents were picked up by a hitchhiker, and we haven't seen them all day. You gotta help us, mister. Hold on. First, what are your names? The way their eyes gazed back at me reminded me of dead fish on the market. The son, crying moments before, now spoke boldly to me. Our parents are missing. You gotta let us into your car. There was an uneasy energy to the boy. He didn't blink when you spoke to him. I can stay here and watch over you. Just let us into your car, please, mister, the sister said as she tugged at the old-fashioned handle of my car. Both seemed to wonder why the hell I wasn't complying. There is no reason for anyone to enter or exit my car. The son tried for the back door and would have pulled it open if I hadn't slammed down the thumb lock and done the same for the others. I've been in road jumps before. Just because I saw two kids now did not mean others were hiding elsewhere, especially in the woods. The sister began to cry and pound on the window. You gotta let us in. We heard growling, and we can't shut our door after the crash. They're bears. They're gonna get in and eat us. You gotta let us in. If there's a bear, I'll handle it. The boy yanked on the same back passenger side door. We haven't eaten or drank anything all day. I held up an evidence bag of cherry tomatoes and 2 bottles of distilled water. They just stared blankly at me, as if doing their best to hide their annoyance. Are you allergic? Do you want just the water? Nothing. I shifted gears. Were you stranded all day? No answer. If you were, you would have been caught in that rain shower. Your vehicle is dusty. Where did you drive from? Just let us into your car, mister, the girl said again. I eyed the Tina Turner pack cassette player and bulky headphones. You like retro stuff? I haven't seen a working cassette in years. Where are you guys from? The boy slowly beat his small fist on the glass and whoa. You are not supposed to ask us questions. You are supposed to help us. Help us, Howard. The girl's voice dropped an octave, as did her brother's. Yes. Help us, Moxley. Do the right thing for once in your miserable life. Something in the car moved, and I let off the brake. They let go as soon as my car lurched forward. I drove away calmly. They didn't attempt to follow me. I stopped a passing pickup 5 miles up the road and told him about what I saw and warned him not to stop, that nothing looked right or natural about the children or the situation. The man and his wife gave me the look you would give someone who wants you to give a personal message to JFK. They nodded their heads, said thank you, and drove on. I waited by the side of the road until they left before tailing them. Eventually, I saw the 2 vehicles meet and kept back in the darkness a few hundred feet. The husband exited the vehicle to see the damage. What happened in the dark and was extremely fast. I will do my best to describe a process that took no more than 15 seconds. The girl jumped into the vehicle and pulled the door closed. A moment later, she erupted into gelatinous foam that busted out the windows of the truck and completely devoured the vehicle in seconds. The husband turned and witnessed his wife get trapped just as the son tackled the man's legs and erupted into a ball of foam himself, knocking the man into the station wagon that had already begun to soften like butter in a hot room. The masses came together and then compressed, containing the erupting tanks and bursting tires in dull puffs. The colorless form coalesced into an exact copy of the pickup truck the couple was driving. 4 bodies formed behind the dash. Then headlights. The copies looked at me as they passed. The children were in the back, smiling and waving goodbye in unison. The lures I'm sure the car will use again. I turned around to pursue them when I spun out and crashed in a way that forced my driver's door open. I could not stop them. Neither can you. So, if you see 2 kids on 101, call the cops, send help, but do not stop. They stalk the thicket and they aren't choosy about their prey. Well, that's pretty much the most horrible thing I've ever seen. It was the only thing I could think to say as I stood over the body of one of Bill Morton's calves. Bill stood behind me, nodding his head in utter agreement. He snorted hard and spit into the field before hiking up his pants. Apparently, this was the 3rd calf he'd lost in as many weeks. Aliens. His gruff voice hit my ears, and it didn't instantly register what he just said. Aliens? I repeated, looking away from the horrid state of the calf. Yeah, you know? Aliens. His eyes were dead serious, so I avoided the smirk that was threatening to develop on my face. I saw a documentary about the kind of stuff they do to cows on YouTube. Nasty stuff. I knelt next to the animal. The grass was soaked in blood that was already drying in the summer heat. I could see puncture marks dotted on its hide that seemed to go in a straight line. Blood matted the fur in little circles around each wound. The calf's head looked as if it had been ripped apart, and most of the brain was missing. Also gone was the calf's tongue and eyes. No, Bill. I'd guess more likely this is an animal attack. I looked over all the wounds again and scratched my stubble. No offense to your keen detective skills, deputy, but what kind of animal does that? He got down next to me and pointed to the torn apart skull. I can't readily say, Bill. And I truly couldn't. I figured that an animal attack was far more likely than an alien cow mutilation, but I'd be damned if I couldn't tell it all from the state of the calf. I'd seen my share of coyote attacks, and even a few mountain lions. When you work as a sheriff's deputy in a ranch town, those calls are common. This didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. Of course you can't, Frank, 'cause it's aliens. I'm telling you. He got back up with a wheeze and wiped the sweat from his brow. Them government boys in that facility outside of town, ask them, I'm sure they know all about it. The facility off the highway? I got up with him, shifting my gun belt and straightening my uniform as I did so. It's the Department of Agriculture, Bill. I don't think they are going to know much about aliens. Sure, they don't, and I don't know much about whiskey and Johnny Cash tins. He paused for a moment and snorted again. I know a lot about those things. I got that. I responded, the smirk finally breaking through on my face enough to elicit an annoyed reaction from old Bill. I decided to smooth things over with an offer. We'll round up with fish and game to see if we can't get some people out here to help us hunt down your calf killer. In the meantime, how about I stop by after work and we beat the bushes ourselves? See if we can't solve this issue a bit sooner? Bill's eyes skinned the thicket before he nodded. All right, deputy, but I'm telling you that I don't think we're going to find anything unless we look to the skies. He slipped his thumbs into his belt and looked up at the midday sky. I laughed to myself and clapped Bill on the shoulder. I was still taking it all with some measure of calm, back when I thought the worst it could be was some road wolf or mountain lion. I didn't know at the time what we would find stalking around that thicket and in the trees, and if I had, I may have just grabbed the gas can from my patrol vehicle and set the whole damn place ablaze. Bill thinks it's what? Terry laughed and looked at me with wide-eyed surprise. Terry was a fellow deputy and longtime friend. He offered to help me and Bill look for the predator that was going after any of Bill's calves that wandered too close to the thicket. We'd loaded up my truck with a couple of lever-action 30-30 rifles and some extra ammo. No bullshit, the guy thinks it's aliens. I took the turn onto the road that led to Bill's property. Bill is out there, man. Dude's a riot. Terry paused and let out a contemplative. Though I gotta say, the way you describe it, I can't exactly tell you what we're looking for. I wish I could give you a better clue, but I'm just as stumped as you. The truck's headlights illuminated the front of Bill's ranch, and I slowed to a stop. Big Cat would have dragged it off. Coyotes would have eaten its guts, same with a wolf. Ain't no bears around here, and I'm pretty sure they don't kill like that. He undid his seatbelt and shook his head like he was trying to jostle the answer loose. Shit, maybe it is aliens, he said with a laugh. It's not aliens. I chuckled back as I jumped out of the truck. Don't you be so sure, deputy. I heard Bill's gruff voice boom out of the darkness as he walked from the side of his house to greet us. He was wearing his hunting oranges and carrying a 12 gauge. A headlamp was strapped to his balding head. His old retriever Bootsy walked at his heel. Even a dumb cowpuncher like me is smart enough to understand there are things out there beyond my understanding. Oh, of that, I'm sure. Terry pulled one of the 30-30s out of the back of the truck and threw it over his shoulder. The universe is a big place, boys. Bill looked up at the night sky, neither ignoring or oblivious to Terry's joke. No telling what's out there. Well, Bill, I pulled the other 30-30 from the back of the truck and started loading it. Right now, I'm a bit more concerned with what's out in that thicket than what's hiding among the stars. Fair enough. Bill did his trademark snort and then spit into the dirt. He switched on the headlamp and shouldered his shotgun. "Y'all ready?" Bootsy, clearly noticing his master was ready to go, ran up ahead towards the field and looked back at us. He did a quick run in a circle as if to tell us to hurry the hell up. "Let's go back to say." Terry paused and looked at both Bill and myself with a shrug. "Alien, I guess." Terry and I laughed, and Bill grunted as we walked across the field towards the thicket, Bootsy leading the way. We walked the edge of the thicket, shining our flashlights while looking to see if we could catch signs of anything stalking around the underbrush. Bootsy ran back and forth sniffing at the edge of the bushes and occasionally stopping to pee and let whatever was inside know that he'd been there. "So, what did Fish and Game say?" Bill whispered to me as he dropped down with a huff and looked into an opening between the tall bushes. "They transferred me around a bunch. Hell, by the end, I'm not sure I was talking to someone at Fish and Game. When they finally got me talking to the person they wanted me talking to, he said they'd be sending someone out right away. I thought I saw something shift behind the brush and looked in further. My voice got even quieter, but I finished my thought. Decided it was still better to just come out and look around ourselves tonight. You know, the government right away could mean a few weeks. Oh, I'm sure they'll send someone out sooner than that." Bill got back to his feet and adjusted the lamp on his head. "They don't want to give us too much time poking around out here." "I'm sure you're quite right, Bill." I laughed again and looked further up the thicket to see Terry standing extremely close to the thick bushes. At first, I thought he was looking at something, but I noticed his flashlight was down by his side. Bootsy came sprinting past me at blinding speed and ran toward Terry while barking his head off. I started running toward Terry as well, with Bill jogging his best shortly behind me. As Terry came closer into view, I could see the look on his face. His eyes were wide with terror, and his lips were pulled back into an awful grimace. He looked as if he wanted nothing more than to scream, but for some reason, it was frozen in the back of his throat and choking him. His arms were at his sides, one hand holding the flashlight and the other balled into a tight fist. The 30-30 was still slung over his shoulder, and the question of why he hadn't pulled it flashed through my mind before I noticed exactly why. His arms were pinned to his side by something that my mind couldn't even start to process. At first, I thought they were giant leaves or branches. Their dark green color matched the surrounding thicket almost perfectly. There were two of them, at least 4 feet long, that had wrapped around Terry's body in what looked like an uninvited embrace. What in the hell? I stopped dead in my tracks, startled, as the things wrapped around Terry suddenly squeezed tighter and an audible hiss filled the air. "Don't get any closer," Terry shouted, his voice in utter panic. Bootsy barked around his feet now, and the hiss in the air got louder. Tears streaked his face as he tried to turn his head to look in my direction. "Oh God, man, please, please, get this dog away from me. It doesn't like the dog." "Bootsy. Heel." I heard Bill's voice behind me, somehow firm but shaky at the same time. He drew in a deep breath. Bootsy continued barking wildly at whatever had a hold of Terry. I realized what was holding Terry so firmly were massive chitinous appendages, like insect legs. I stood in utter shock, my eyes just barely making out the massive shape hiding in the darkness of the tall, thick shrubbery. The thing squeezed him tighter, and I could see blood streaking down his arms. "Oh God, please, help me." Terry's voice was laced with such horrible terror that it woke me from my trance. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and tried to find an angle to take a shot where I wasn't going to risk putting a bullet in my friend. "Bootsy. Heel now." Bill shouted again, taking a step to the side of me but not daring to get any closer to Terry. The hiss filled the air again. Bill continued yelling for his dog. Terry screamed his head off. The thing in the bushes hissed and chittered. Through all of this, I took aim at a shadow I could barely see and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gun echoed through the night sky like thunder. I had missed, the bullet striking nothing but branches and whizzing past the thing as it yanked Terry forward into the thicket. I could hear his screams as it dragged him along through the underbrush. The whole thing happened so fast that I didn't even notice Bootsy leap through the hole made by Terry's body and give chase. I gripped my rifle and followed closely behind the retriever, Bill following as close as he was capable of. The branches scraped and cut at my skin as I ran. It was pulling Terry so quickly that even Bootsy was having trouble keeping up. What in the name of Johnny's ghost is that thing? Bill growled out from behind me, always both preceding and following his question. I didn't answer. I didn't know. I just ran and listened to my friend scream. His screams were getting further away from me, and I wondered how in the name of God it could move so fast. Then suddenly, the screams stopped, and my heart jumped into my throat. Bootsy had vanished somewhere into the darkness in front of me. He was still barking at the thing that took Terry, but they echoed throughout the thicket, and I couldn't tell exactly where they were coming from. We'd run far enough and the trees were sprouting up from the ground around us, and it felt like I was in a maze, making myself increasingly lost with every second. We gotta go back, Frank. We gotta call someone. Bill shouted. I'm telling you, that thing ain't no normal animal. It ain't from around here. Would you shut up about your stupid alien nonsense? I turned on my heel and screamed at him before turning my flashlight back toward the brush in front of me. I didn't see any signs of Terry or the thing that had taken him. Somewhere off in the distance, Bootsy's barks turned into high-pitched whimpering yelps overlaid with the horrid hissing sound that it made. Then Bootsy was silent too. I looked at Bill's face, his eyes filling with tears at what was likely the sound of his dog's last moments. The night had become deathly quiet in only a matter of seconds. The air was still and warm against my bleeding skin as my ears hunted for any sound of movement around us. Bill, I whispered, reaching out to him slowly and putting my hand on his shoulder. We need to go now. Bill silently gripped his shotgun with white knuckles. When his eyes drifted to me, he seemed a million miles away. Bill, I said a little louder and firmer. Did you hear me, man? We gotta go. There was more hissing followed by what sounded like chirps and clicks. From behind Bill, I could see something rise out of the brush, wreathed in shadow. It stood at least 6 feet tall as it straightened up. 2 huge insectoid claws protruded from the front of its body. They were bent forward at the halfway point, and the creature held them in front of it as if in prayer. No way, I thought to myself, as Bill turned on his heel at the presence he sensed behind him. His headlamp illuminated the massive green insect and brought it into full view. Its diamond-shaped head held 2 bulbous eyes that looked directly at us and 2 antennae that had to measure at least 2 feet in length. Mandibles flicked up and down at the point of its jaw, making a clicking noise. It lowered the posture of its long body, the rest of its legs bending to bring it closer to our level as it let out a horrible hiss. Bill shrieked and raised his 12 gauge to fire, but what I now could see was a massive mantis, impossible as that may seem, lurched forward and dug the spines of its forelegs into him, causing his shot to go wild. I raised my gun, but by the time it was leveled at the creature, it had already lowered its head to Bill and begun digging its mandibles into his skull. Bill's screams were so loud that I could still hear them as I pulled the trigger on the 30-30 and fired. The bullet struck the side of its face, and even in the low light, I saw one of its eyes explode. I half expected it to drop, but Bill's screams continued, and instead of falling, the mantis just squeezed Bill even tighter with its forelegs and dragged him backward at a surprising speed. I let off 2 more rounds, but its thin body was hiding in the brush, and it was waving Bill around like a human shield. It was like the damn thing understood. It vanished into the darkness, and Bill's screams went silent shortly thereafter. That horrible chewing sound is still something I hear when I close my eyes. In that moment, knowing that my friends had been eaten by these things, my mind shattered. I ran down the path. We made our way through the thicket as fast as my legs could move me. I didn't bother to look back. I didn't want to see what was following me. I could hear more clicks and see more moving shadows all around me as I ran. With every single branch that scraped me, I wondered if it was the claw of one of those things getting ready to drag me off and devour me alive. I could hear the hissing, but also the hum of engines and the sight of lights out in the field. Overhead, I heard the thrumming of a helicopter passing over us. I burst through the thicket and into the previously empty field, now filled to the brim with black SUVs and men in hazmat suits setting up lights. A man who looked like a park ranger came running up to me, screaming for another group behind him to hold their fire. I was in complete shock and hadn't even noticed the group of men leveling AR-15s in my direction. As soon as the man touched my arm, I blacked out. I woke up in a blindingly white room. I could hear the hustle of people running around outside, and as I surveyed my surroundings, I realized I was inside a tent. I attempted to get up from the cot I had been laid on, but a hand gently touched my shoulder, and I heard a woman's voice. "Easy now, just take it easy." I blinked a few times, trying to get my eyes adjusted to the light. A woman in a lab coat moved around in front of me as I got into a sitting position and rubbed my face with my hands. "Where am I?" I dropped my hands and looked to the woman, who was now leaning on a shaky fold-up table with laptops and paperwork scattered across it. She had a shock of red hair pulled up high and held in place by pencils, and her glasses sat low on her nose. She looked to a soldier that was positioned behind her and nodded, a gesture he returned before stepping out of the tent. "Your name is Franklin Beaumont?" "You are." She scanned a clipboard in her hand. "You are a sheriff's deputy in this area?" "Yeah," I answered quietly, looking around the room at machinery I didn't understand. "Who are you?" "I'm Dr. McDonald, Karen McDonald. I'm Dr. Karen." She extended a hand that was as awkward as her reply, and I reached out and shook it. "And you are still on site?" "Site?" I asked, not having any idea what she was talking about. "About 100 yards from where you collapsed." She looked down at her clipboard again. "It was probably just shock. You've been through a terribly traumatic experience, Mr. Beaumont. Do you remember?" It all flooded back. Terry and Bill, Bootsy, the mantis that had torn them apart. I fought back tears and nearly bit a hole into my lip. Dr. Karen simply stared at me with inquisitive green eyes and scribbled something further on her clipboard. "Of course, I remember," I finally said. "Those things killed them. Wolves. Wolves, Mr. Beaumont." A man in a blue suit walked into the room. His hair was slicked back, and he wore a practiced smile. "Not things. You've been through a major trauma, and we just want to make sure that you're not misremembering things." "I'm remembering just fine," I gruffly spoke to the man as he walked around to the same side of the folding table as Dr. Karen. 2 soldiers with AR-15s followed closely behind him. He stood in front of me with his arms crossed, waiting for me to continue. What I saw was not a wolf. Of course, it was Mr. Beaumont. What else would it have been? He looked at Dr. Karen, and she shrugged. I saw instantly what was going on as the 2 soldiers behind the man in the blue suit looked nervous. "I don't know." I hung my head, suddenly very uncomfortable and scared. The mantis obviously had some connection to whoever these people were, and they were not playing around. Mr. Blue Suit and Dr. Karen were the handshake and the smile. The men behind them were the much tougher form of negotiation. "We are deeply sorry about your friends. Know that we at the U.S. Department of Agriculture give you our word that we will take care of this pack of wolves and ensure that no one will ever be hurt by them again." The man in the blue suit grabbed a binder off the table and held it out in his hand. Department of Agriculture, I laughed into my hands. You guys are from the Department of Agriculture? I laughed again and looked at the soldiers with their guns and black night ops uniforms. Yes, Mr. Beaumont. The blue-suited man pushed the binder into my hands. Who else would we be? I spent the rest of the night signing papers saying that my friends and I had tracked the wolves to the thicket where we'd been attacked. I was to decline any interviews on the subject, and if pressed, I was to toe the line on the official story. I can still remember the plastic smile on the face of the man in the blue suit. He gave artificial condolences as they sent me on my way. Dr. Karen gave more genuine ones, but they rang hollow. That night I drank a fifth of bourbon alone in my apartment and cried myself to sleep. There was never any direct threat made against me to keep my mouth shut. They made the cars that followed me and the men parked outside my home noticeable enough that they never needed to make any kind of direct threat. I could only imagine what government agency the blue-suited man was actually from, but I knew when there was a gun to my temple, and I doubted very seriously that the Department of Agriculture was holding it. That's why I'm sharing this story here and leaving out the details. I can't keep it inside anymore, and if I go anywhere official, then I'm a dead man. I know what I saw out there, though, and it sure as hell wasn't wolves. Our government grew something. I don't know if it escaped or if they let it loose on their own, but they are most certainly responsible. I drive out towards Bill's old ranch sometimes, and I can see the lights of whatever makeshift area they still have set up out there. The whole thing is surrounded with a massive fence now, and signs hang on it every 30 feet. No trespassing, by order of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Bill didn't have any family, so it was easy for them to swoop in and take the place for themselves without some nosy relatives wondering what happened to him or why the government was stealing their land. I'll stand out by that fence sometimes and smoke cigarettes and listen. I'll listen to their trucks driving in and out from the drive and the hustle of men doing whatever those men do out there now. I'll also hear that hiss, that awful hiss, but sometimes I wonder if that's just all in my head. All I know for sure is that there were no wolves out there that night, but there is most certainly something stalking the thicket on Bill Morton's old property. Something that isn't choosy about its prey. My son's imaginary friend is dead. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was strong in the air as I descended the stairs. I stretched languidly when I reached the bottom, my body still trying to wake up after a long, restful sleep. "Good morning, all," I announced as I made my way into the kitchen. I gave my wife, Claire, a quick peck as I passed by the stove. "Dad," my son squealed, hopping out of his chair and rushing over. That never got old. Luke was 4 and a firecracker. I lifted the boy off his feet and swung him around, much to the chagrin of his mother, who was trying to get him to settle down long enough to eat his Cheerios. Noticing Claire's harried expression, I quickly dropped Luke back into his little chair to finish his breakfast. "How did you sleep, little man?" "Fine. Reggie came to see me last night." "Ah, yes, and how is fine Reginald doing these days?" I asked with mock seriousness. "His name is Reggie, Dad, not Reginald," Luke said, drawing out the last syllable as if the name Reginald was an absolutely absurd moniker. "Apologies. How is Reggie doing?" I responded, enunciating the name. My wife shot me a dark look. I knew I shouldn't encourage this new imaginary friend my son had concocted. Claire certainly did not approve, but I honestly couldn't see the harm in it. He was 4, after all. What 4-year-old hasn't had an imaginary friend? And as we had just moved into a new home in a new village, I think it was his way of coping with being in a strange place and settling in. The move to Castlewood was somewhat unexpected. My job had offered the chance of a transfer, along with a sizable promotion. It was too good of a deal to pass up. The drawback, of course, was that the abrupt change had left very little time for my child and wife to acclimate to our new surroundings. "He's okay," Luke said. I glanced up at Luke. "Just okay?" "That's too bad." What did good old Reggie have to say? "Nothing much," Luke said, slurping milk from his spoon. Just stuff," I parroted. "Yeah. He said he doesn't like you." I feigned distress. "No. Reggie, you wound me." I tickled Luke lightly, which resulted in a round of giggles. "Well, perhaps I can meet Reggie officially at your birthday party next weekend, and he will realize I'm not such a bad guy." My son laughed brightly and responded nonchalantly, "That's silly, Dad. Reggie can't come. He's dead." I heard the spatula my wife was holding clatter onto the stove. We both locked eyes. I paused for a beat before responding. "You say Reggie is dead?" I finally asked, looking back to my son. "Sure, he's been dead for a long time," my son responded before spooning another mouthful of Cheerios into his mouth. "Mom, can I go play out in the garden now?" I finished almost a whole bowl. Claire looked slightly distracted before she nodded to Luke. "Yes, but make sure to bring your bowl to the sink first." "Yes, Mom," Luke shouted, already running his half-full bowl of cereal to the sink. He dashed out into the back garden without a second look back. I stared at his retreating figure. "What do you think that was all about?" I asked my wife. "I don't know." "Quite creepy, don't you think?" she responded. "Quite. I don't know how he could have concocted such a story, to be honest." "Think there's something to it?" Claire shot a look of disdain my way. "Are you asking me if there is a ghost haunting our house and he visits our son at night?" "Really, John? What, you don't believe in ghosts?" "Of course not. It's a load of nonsense." "Please don't tell me you actually believe in that." "I don't know," I said with a look of contemplation. "I think there is a lot in the universe that we don't understand. Who's to say there's not something after death?" She turned back to the eggs she was still cooking. "That's ridiculous, John. Anyway, as you said before many times, it's just a harmless imaginary friend, right?" She looked back over her shoulder at me. "Right," I muttered, only half listening at this point. My mind was on other matters now. I stared out the window, watching Luke play in his sandbox. Maybe I should stay in Luke's room tonight. You know, check it out, make sure there's not some weirdo sneaking into our son's room at night. Really? Don't you think that's a little overkill? What could it hurt? It's a Friday night. Mom would be happy to keep him for a sleepover. They can binge watch Paw Patrol while she gorges him on popcorn and sugar cookies. And you can get a night to relax in the tub with a glass of wine and a good book. She tried to look annoyed, but I could tell she was intrigued by the idea. "This is ridiculous, you know," she said, half-heartedly. "Come on, you know a good soak and a night to yourself sounds pretty great." She rolled her eyes. I knew I'd won. Whatever. But if your mom is busy, it's off. Just as I had predicted, Mom was pleased as punch to take Luke for the night. She picked him up early that evening, and Claire and I enjoyed a lovely night of carry-out pizza and cheap wine. I sent her off to have her bubble bath while I watched some goofy alien show on the History Channel. By 11 o'clock, I found myself getting sleepy and ready to turn in. After changing into my pajamas and brushing my teeth, I announced to my wife that I was off to commune with the dead in my hokiest spooky voice. She was already in bed and engrossed in a paperback. "Have fun," she muttered distractedly, blowing me a kiss. I left the warmth of our bedroom and shuffled down the hall into Luke's room. I flipped on the overhead light and looked around. The pale blue walls sported a large clown mural that stared back at me with a toothy grin. I shuddered. Why, oh why, did my wife decide on a carnival theme for his new room? There was nothing creepier than a clown, hands down. I walked over to Luke's tiny bed with his striped blue comforter. My feet would hang off the end, but I would survive. I crawled into bed and shut off the lamp that was shaped like an elephant. Darkness enveloped the room, save for a small nightlight in the corner shaped like a big top. The soft red light gave the clown a hellish glow. How had I not noticed how creepy this room could be at night? Turning away from the eerie clown, I lay down and tried my best to slow my breathing and relax. I awoke abruptly from a deep sleep to the sound of creaking. I had a moment of confusion as I tried to recognize my unfamiliar surroundings. Right. Luke's room. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise. The closet door in the far right corner was ajar. Hadn't it been closed when I went to sleep? Luke's tiny backpack swung slightly from where it hung on the doorknob. Hello? I tentatively whispered. Is anyone there? Silence. I turned to my right and my gaze landed on the clown. I really needed to talk to Claire about that. The nightlight still gave off that creepy red glow, making the room appear almost disorienting. I looked around the ceiling, noting the pile of stuffed animals in the corner and the bookcase by the door. You're not Luke. My gaze whipped back over to the closet. The voice was so quiet, I couldn't even be sure I had heard it. Who's there? I whispered to the closet. Again, silence met my query. I rubbed my eyes. This was ridiculous. What was I even doing in here? I was a grown man sleeping in a tiny bed next to arguably the creepiest clown in the universe. I threw the covers back and was about to swing my legs over the side of the bed when I heard it again. You're not Luke. I froze in place. There was no denying it this time. I had heard a voice coming from the closet. Slowly, as if I didn't really want to see, I dragged my gaze toward the dark closet in the corner. From the red glow of the nightlight, I saw a tiny, pale face. Only the top half of the face was visible, large, dark orbs for eyes, a grayish-white forehead, and a matting of dark hair. The face stared at me from high up in the closet, like it was some obscenely tall child standing just behind the wall. What the heck? Who are you? I stammered. The face remained still. I realized the eyes had not yet blinked. Are you Reggie? I asked. At the sound of the name, the face abruptly disappeared and I heard a scrabbling noise come from the closet. Where is Luke? The voice was louder and coarser this time, with Luke's name coming up gravelly and angry from the child. He's not here, I said, glad to hear my voice steady this time. What do you want? There was silence for several seconds. Finally, the voice spoke, softer this time. Want Luke? I was shocked into silence for a few beats. You can't have Luke, I raised my voice defensively. The room suddenly grew cold and the air crackled. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Before I could say anything in response, I spotted movement at the floor of the closet. The white face was back, and I could see it more clearly from this vantage. It was the face of a child, but corrupted. This was not a child. The skin was sickly and thin. The eyes were sunken, almost desiccated. Dark circles surrounded the black eyes. The lips were pale and bloodless and were curled into a sickening grin. It was the teeth that shook me the most. They were extremely small, thin, and jagged, as if each tooth had been broken intentionally to create this horrific and serrated maw. The chin rested directly on the floor, and the face looked directly at me with an anger such as I had never seen on the face of a child. It was a face of pure and utter rage. The face stared for a few seconds before the child creature began to move. No, not move. Slither. With its limbs tied by its body, it slithered on its belly from the closet, all the while whispering in an increasingly sibilant voice, "Want Luke? Want Luke?" I backed up as far as I could until I was pressed against the headboard of Luke's tiny bed while the child snaked itself forward. Soon, the head and shoulders were no longer visible. I soon lost sight of its pointed white feet as it continued to glide lightly forward. The child was under the bed. I gripped the small mattress with both hands, not knowing what to do. My heart rate was through the roof and beads of sweat had welled up on my forehead. The mattress jolted as the creature underneath grabbed onto the springs from below as if it were some deranged bat. The springs of the tiny mattress groaned from the extra weight. Slowly, I could feel the movement of the creature as it moved one hand and then the other, until I could finally see tiny, jagged fingernails appear on the side of the bed. I've never understood the term paralyzed with fright. I always imagined that faced with a raging monster or axe murderer, I could easily find the willpower to get my ass in gear and move. But in this moment, the ability to move had absolutely abandoned me, and I was forced to watch in silent horror as the tiny, dead hand was joined by another. I shut my eyes tight together, unwilling to have that horrible impersonation of a child burned into my retinas. And it was then that I heard it. "John? John, come back to bed, this is ridiculous." The lights clicked on, and as I finally regained the use of my muscles to turn my head and open my eyes, the visage of my wife came into view. "John? Are you okay?" I stared at her for a beat before I whipped back around to the side of the bed where the hands had grasped the mattress only moments before. Nothing. I released the breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. "I'm fine," I croaked. "All fine." She looked towards where I had been staring. Not seeing anything, she continued, "Come back to bed. I can't sleep without you. It gives me the creeps sleeping alone." She turned and left, her robe trailing behind her. I waited for a full minute, listening intently for any sound. All was quiet. Hesitantly, I lowered one foot and then the other to the floor. As I stood up, I fully expected to see a tiny, ragged hand reaching from below the darkness of the bed to grasp my ankle, but none came. I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed. The possibility of coming face to face with that hideous mockery of a child made me feel sick. Instead, I turned around, walked out of the room, and shut the door behind me. Back in my own bedroom, with my wife sleeping peacefully beside me, I laid awake for hours, unable to get the face of the child from my mind. Unable to sleep with the fear that I would awake with those small, cold hands wrapping around my throat and that snake-like voice whispering in the darkness. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight shone through the partially open blinds and birds chirped annoyingly outside the second-floor window. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes as I contemplated the prior evening. I couldn't let Luke stay in that room again. Not with that thing in there. No. I had to do something. I had to protect my son. I grabbed my laptop from where it lay gathering dust under my nightstand. The thing took what felt like hours to load. When I was finally able to get the dinosaur up and running, I loaded up my web browser and began my research. How to get rid of ghosts. The cursor blinked rapidly as if mocking me. I quickly backspaced and typed DIY exorcism. Okay, that was worse. Cleansing spirits from your house. That was better. I hit enter. The results were mixed, as was to be expected. But I finally found a few websites that gave me the information I needed. A few hours later, I had a plan. And I had a name. Reginald Ward. The little brat was named Reginald after all. It appears that unbeknownst to me or my wife, our home had been the scene of the tragic death of an 8-year-old boy in 1907. Reginald Ward, according to what I have found online, had passed away from consumption, or tuberculosis, as it's more commonly referred to these days. As distressed as I was to learn that our new home was the scene of the horrific death of a child, I was even more distressed that said child was still in residence. I shuddered to think about what had befallen the child over the past decades to turn it into this thing. My wife poked her head in the doorway, startling me out of my thoughts. "What are you doing? You've been in here all morning." "Nothing," I hedged, slowly closing the laptop screen so as not to make her suspicious. "Just looking at stuff online." "Okay." She drew out the word while giving me an odd look. Yep. She was definitely suspicious. I had to think quickly. "Hey, you've seemed really stressed lately. What if I had my mom keep Luke for another few hours and you had a spa day?" Her brows perked up. "Seriously? I thought you said that spa days were the most useless way to spend your money." My smile was tight. It was true. I thought it was an entire waste of money. You literally got nothing out of it. But I had to get her out of the house somehow. She couldn't be here while I was performing the cleansing. "Nonsense. You deserve it. Go ahead, give them a call and set it up." She couldn't help the grin that spread across her face. "You don't have to twist my arm," she yelled as she turned and scurried downstairs to make the call. I stopped myself from mentally tallying how much this little outing would cost me and focused my attention back on the task at hand. I felt like I had a pretty good idea of how to get rid of Reggie. From what I read online, it was better to do the cleansing at night. But I didn't have that sort of time. I had to deal with this now. I made the quick call to my mom to see if she could keep Luke until that evening. After coordinating the time that she would drop him off, I quickly dressed and hurried downstairs. "Babe, I've got to run a few errands. I'll be back in a bit." "Okay." I'm headed to the spa in a half hour. They had a cancellation for a deluxe package at the last minute. Isn't that great? I mentally groaned but pasted a smile on my tense face. "That's great, honey. Have fun." I grabbed my keys and hurried out to my car. 45 minutes later, I walked back into the house carrying my assorted purchases. Claire's car was gone, so I didn't bother calling out for her. I was all alone. Well, not alone, exactly. I carried my purchases upstairs and opened the door to Luke's room. The red curtains were drawn, and the room seemed just as creepy as the night before. The day had turned rainy and dreary, so what little light came through the curtains gave the room that same, dim glow as the previous night. I shuddered. Shutting the door, I emptied the bag of items on the floor. I paused to take stock of my haul. A small, wrapped bundle of sticks I was told was called a sage smudging wand, an abalone shell, a large feather, a container of coarse salt, and a Bible. I pulled up my phone and found the article I had been referencing earlier. I quickly reread the instructions just to be sure I had everything correct. I first grabbed the salt and sprinkled a line across the bedroom door. This was supposedly to prevent the spirit from going into another part of the house during the cleansing. I didn't know if this would do much, but I wasn't taking any chances. Next, I placed the abalone shell on top of the Bible. The Bible wasn't specifically in the instructions, but I figured it certainly couldn't hurt. Again, I was taking no chances. I walked over to the window and pulled back the red curtain. The rain was really coming down now. I opened the window slightly. The purpose of this, I had learned during my hurried research, was to give the spirit a pathway to leave the house. I didn't want to get rainwater all over my son's bedroom floor, so I only opened it a smidge. That should hopefully be enough. I pulled out a small lighter from my pocket and flicked it on. The small flame wavered in the semi-darkness of the small room. I picked up the smudge wand and lit the end. Red embers glowed as the stick caught fire. I quickly blew the open flame out, but the end of the smudge wand continued to slowly smolder, the red embers causing a fragrant, earthy smoke to emit from the end. I quickly dropped the smoldering stick into the abalone shell and picked it up along with the Bible. With my other hand, I grabbed the large feather. I was ready. I began to circle the room. With each step, I would use the feather to waft the smoke, blanketing the room in that thick, earthy smell. I continued to circle the room twice more, keeping silent as I wafted the smoke, permeating the room. After 3 rounds, I spoke. Reggie Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here, and you must leave. I paused momentarily in my path. Nothing happened. I continued again. Reggie Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here, and you must leave. Still nothing. I started walking again. Reggie Ward, in the name of God, I command you to leave. At first, I thought there had still been no change. Slowly, I began to realize that there had, in fact, been a shift. I could no longer hear the rain. It was as if a thick layer of cotton had encased the room. The air was heavy and dense. I almost had the feeling of being underwater. I could hear my heartbeat increase. Reggie, in the name of God, I command you to leave. On the word leave, I heard a thump from the closet. I paused in my pacing and stared over at the closet. The door was slightly ajar. Thick darkness enveloped the inside of the small closet. Without removing my eyes from the door, I started again. Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. Another thump. And then, so though I could barely hear it, a hissing sound, not unlike breath whistling from between clenched teeth. A deep, long scratching shortly joined the hissing. Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave. You are not welcome here. The hissing became louder. And from the depths of the dark closet, a small, moaning voice. Don't. The word was dragged out in a hissing rasp. Reggie, you must leave now. I yelled towards the closet. Don't. The hissing, breathy rasp was louder this time. From the darkness of the closet, those 2 horrible, small gray hands emerged and clasped onto the door frame. John. The sound of my name in that sibilant tone literally made my skin crawl. John, don't. I did not comply. Reggie Ward. In the name of God, I command you to flee this house. The top of the small, gray face joined the hands. The dark eyes had a wary look. I could have almost felt sorry for the creature, but I did not. Quieter this time, I again spoke. Reggie, you must leave. Wisps of smoke began to emerge from the small hands, as if there were some great, internal flame churning just beneath the skin. The entity did not appear to be able to speak any longer. Only that ragged, shrill hiss filled the air. I watched with trepidation as the hands fell abruptly to the ground. I could see the sharp nails gouging crescents into the wood floors as it laboriously began to drag its body forward out of the darkness of the closet. In the light of the storm, and in its weakened state, the creature was pitiful. Gray, mottled skin rippled as the smoke drifted almost casually from its surface. The thing lifted its large black eyes to me in supplication. With great effort, it spoke. Don't. I did not have a chance to respond. The smoke enveloped the creature. It swept silently through the open window. I stood still for several seconds before my knees finally gave out. I had not even realized the toll the process had taken on me until this very moment. I wiped a thin layer of perspiration from my brow as I looked towards the empty closet. It was over. Later that evening, my wife and I sat on the couch, each nursing a glass of white wine. I had not said much after she got home, and she, relaxed and zen out after her day of pampering, had not pressed. I had not fully processed all that had happened within the last 24 hours. Honestly, I wasn't sure I would ever process it. But to know my son was now safe was solace enough for me. I took a large swig of the sweet wine and leaned back into the soft sofa. The doorbell rang, and before I could even set down my glass, the hurried footfalls of my son rushing through the front hallway reached my ears. Dad. Mom. Luke rushed into the living room and launched himself at us. Chuckling, we hugged the rambunctious boy as he told us all about his adventures at Grandma's. He was talking so fast, I could only make out every third word. From what I could tell, they had had a boatload of fun making cookies, playing games, and eating lots and lots of junk food. My mom entered the room at a more sedate pace. Sheesh, Luke, let them breathe, bud. She intoned. I'm going to go see Reggie. I can't wait to tell him about the new puzzle Grandma got me. Before I could say anything, he was already bounding up the stairs and giggling with excitement. My mom shook her head. He could not stop talking about his friend Reggie all weekend. She sat down on the edge of the chair next to the couch where Claire and I still lounged. Well, I have a feeling we won't need to worry about Reggie anymore, I said. My wife gave me a sideways curious glance, but I ignored it. It was the strangest thing, though, my mother continued without acknowledging my statement. When I asked him about Reggie, he said he was dead. I know, said Claire. Rather creepy, isn't it? Yes, my mother agreed. I thought so as well. But he said that he was his friend and that Reggie protected him from the others. My gaze shot to my mom. What did you say? Yeah, it kind of creeped me out too, she said. He said that the others that lived in the attic were mean and tried to come down and hurt Luke. He said that Reggie wouldn't let them, that he protected him and kept him safe. When I tried to press him on it, he clammed up. A cold chill swept over my body. The others? Suddenly, the rasping voice of Reggie came back to me. Want Luke, want Luke. It was as if the floodgates opened in that moment, and I fully understood. Reggie didn't want Luke. He was trying to tell me that they wanted Luke. The others wanted Luke. Reggie had been trying to warn me. He had tried to scare me into leaving. He had tried to help me. To protect my son. I quickly set down my wine glass and snatched the blanket off my legs. Before I could stand fully up, the sound of my son's screams met my ears.